Hello, Atticus authors and self-publishing authors in the indie world. Welcome back to the Atticus Training Zone. As you can see today, I have a very special guest with me. You're in for quite a treat. I have Maxwell Alexander Drake joining me, and he's going to be streaming his brand new class live for you. So this is a first opportunity. It's very exciting. I'm so pumped for you guys. So as always, I like to give a few minutes to let the YouTube algorithm do its thing and make sure that everybody has a chance to join in. So while we're just kind of chatting for a moment or two, Drake, would you like to introduce yourself to the YouTube world?
Sure. So I'm Drake. I am a full-time writer. I've been a full-time writer for almost 20 years now. I am an award-winning novelist, an award-winning script writer. I was the lead fiction writer for a $600 million game from Sony. I've written for other video games. I've written for movies and TV. I've written for stage plays and musicals. I've done comics and graphic novels. There's very few mediums that I haven't written in. And I teach writing all over the world. And that's how me and you met. Because I'm the only author to teach at San Diego Comic-Con, and I've been teaching there now. Well, not the only author to teach, but I'm the only author to teach there for 17 years in a row. And I think that's where you came to one of my classes, was there, if I remember correctly.
We actually met at the 20 bucks to 50K conference in Vegas. Yeah, for the first time.
I do a lot of teaching. So, yeah. So, yeah, that's me. I write. I put words on paper.
And yeah, the world thanks you for it. So yeah, as you mentioned, we met a couple years ago at a conference. I went to one of your writing craft teaching courses, and I think you were teaching 3 different classes at that event. And I went to the first one, and I changed my entire schedule because I had learned so much from that class that I went back and took all of the others. And we'll get into this. After your presentation, you have graciously agreed to stay on and answer questions for everyone who wants to interact live. But I'll give you a sneak preview. These are some of Drake's writing craft books. I don't know if you can see in this, but I have bookmarks in all of them. I have read them all, and I reference them literally every time I'm writing because the education you get is just second to none. Very, very high quality. So this is a bit of a unique class that you're teaching today. I won't give any spoilers away, but as everyone is watching you, I highly recommend having a notebook handy because you will want to take notes. And keep in mind the writing craft element, because keep all your questions for the end. Drake will be answering questions, and you can ask questions about the class, which will be very exciting. I'm sure there'll be plenty of information there. But he's an amazing writing craft teacher. So get your questions out about anything to do with evolving your writing as well.
I will answer any questions but legal questions. I make stuff up for a living. I mean, lawyers make stuff up for a living too, but I literally make stuff up for a living.
Very, very good caveat there. So I can see we have a bunch of people watching already. If you guys want to just say hi in the comment section, let us both know that you can hear us fine. We'll give it another minute or so, and then I'm going to let Drake share his screen and get into the lessons because we want to honor your time as well. S&D says, I'm ready. Notebook and pen to the side. Awesome. Jay Jameson is here from Las Vegas. That's your neck of the woods, Drake.
Yep.
M. Thomas is here from New York. We've got Robert here as well. Okay, great. It sounds like you guys can all hear us. We've got some Canadians in here, my fellow Canadians. So that's wonderful. So thank you guys for sounding out. That's great. As mentioned, leave your comments in the description chat wherever you're joining from, either Facebook or YouTube. As you're going, you can leave them there. I'll be moderating and keeping an eye on everything so that once Drake's presentation is over, we can go back and answer questions. And we're looking forward to some great discussion after really, really great lessons. So Drake, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. And Monique may have hyped this class up a little more than I would have preferred. She is right. This is a brand new class. This is not a class that I would normally make. She requested this, and I was happy to make it. It some of this stuff is going to be kind of obvious because we are going to be talking about writing a book series, and everybody is familiar with this. I mean, we have Game of Thrones and Harry Potter and literally everything that's out there. So some of this stuff is going to be high level stuff. I do try and teach some pretty advanced concepts. So I will be chasing a lot of rabbits. So the slides will say whatever, and then that'll take my brain down a path, and I'll try to give deeper information than just what's on the slide. So this class is how to write a book series. That is what I'm famous for. I tend to write, my current work in progress is 5 novels, 1.4 million words. It'll probably end up with 20 novellas before it's all said and done. So I tend to write a lot of sagas and series and everything like that. So let's get into it. The number one question, I always start off all my classes with a quote. So let me start that. I got 2 screens in front of me, and I got to remember to look at this one. So I start off all my class with a quote. This one's from John Steinbeck. Ideas are like rabbits. You get a couple and learn how to handle them, and pretty soon you have a dozen. And that's really kind of the way I feel about series and stories. You get, a lot of new writers start off and they go, oh, I've only got this one idea and I'll never come up with anything else. But by the time you get to the end of that one, you've got something else. And then by the time you get to that one, you've got 3 something else's. And then it just expands. And pretty soon, I think most people have gone down the path that I went down, where when I started writing, I really thought I've got 1 or 2 stories in me. And then when I started getting more and more ideas, I started carrying around a little tape recorder with me because, it's, any idea that I get is going to be golden and I need to make sure I track it. And so I did that for a while. And then I realized that I get ideas for stories about every 10 minutes now, and I'm never going to write them all. I've only got so much time to write. So now what I do is when I get an idea, I don't write it down. I don't do anything. And if I'm still thinking about it a couple months from now, then it probably is a fairly good idea. And all those ideas that I forgot probably were not the best of ideas. And so that's kind of just how I move through life now. If a story sticks with me, I'll get to it eventually. I don't need to write it down, because if it's powerful enough to stay in my brain for a year or 2, because I definitely have stories like that, then I'm going to get to them. It just means that I'm more and more excited about it. So I love this quote from John Steinbeck. It really does speak to me about how I've move through my life as a story creator. All right. So the number one question I get asked, and I get to ask this all the time. Okay, I've written my first novel. How do I market it? What's the best thing to do to market my first novel? And my answer is always the same. Write a second book. There's no better way to market your first book than to have a second. The reality is, especially in the world we live in, when you have a book, no one cares. I mean, there's so many people that are writing today. I'm pretty sure my dog is working on a novel right now. I'm not 100% sure, but he spends a lot of time at the computer. So he might be also cruising for stuff that I don't want to know about. But that really is it. You need a second book. You need a third book. This is what we're trying to do to capture those audiences. Audiences today want to know that there is some depth if they're going to invest their time in something. So if they see a new author that has 1 book, they're probably going to go, okay, if I remember that person, it's sort of like me and my ideas. If I remember that person and they get a couple more books, I'll check them out. But most of the time, they're just not going to go down that path. I can't tell you how many people that, as I'm out and about doing conventions or whatever, and they'll come up and they'll look at my books and they're like, okay, well, I don't buy anything until you finish the series. So, when you finish, I'll buy it. And I'm like, it's great, but I need to eat now to finish the series. So if you don't buy it now, it may not get finished, but they don't care. They want to have that finished series that they can dig into and read just book after book after book without having to wait in between them. So that really is it. I do believe the best way to market your first book is just to write another book. And there are many next book options. And so I'm going to talk about a few of them as we go through this class. The first is just the easiest. I stole from Monty Python, and now for something completely different. Just write another novel. Literally write another novel, and that gets you a second novel with a caveat that I'll talk about in a second. You can write same character, new situation. This is called a standalone series, and I'll talk about that in a second. You can write same world, different characters, more like a spin-off series. You can write episodic, where you're writing the same character, but it's a, next day, next year, next whatever, and it's episodic, so everything that came before it does matter. And then you step into my world, the serial writing, where it's just one gigantic story. So just to kind of go through these really quickly, writing another story is easy. You write a story about Tim. It is a story. It has 3 acts. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when you're done with that story, you write a story about Max. And it is also a complete story with a beginning, middle, and an end. It has nothing to do with the Tim story. And you write one about Mia, and then Ava, and then Jan, and then Bob. And they're just different worlds, different, whatever. Everything is different about them, and it's fine. I said there's one caveat to this. This is vital. If you're going to do this, you need to write in the same genre. I see so many writers that get into this, and I get it. I'm into a lot of things. Not only do I have my epic fantasy series, me and my podcast partner are co-writing a kind of YA sci-fi fantasy series. I've got a children's movie out there. I've got a Cthulhu Western. I used to, and I need to get back to it. It's been quite a few years, but I used to write romance as a female author. I'm into a lot of things just like anyone else is. No one is just, I only read and watch and write this one genre. I get it. It's nice to kind of stretch your wings and get out there. But here's the reality. If you write a book about Tim and it's Western, and then you write a book about Max and it's sci-fi, you have 2 first books is what you have. Now, that's not a problem unless you're thinking about how we're going to market and build our brand. Because if you're going to build your brand, most of your audience is not going to follow you. Most. So even though both my epic fantasy and let's just use this YA fantasy, sci-fi fantasy thing as an example, both are incredibly well rated. Both the fans are just loving them. But I've got so many of my epic fantasy fans that have written to me that said, I tried to get into that Magic Fall and it just didn't work for me. And of course it doesn't. They're an adult who is very into very heavy, very dark, very serious, very bloody and gory epic fantasy. And then they're stepping into a YA science fiction story for me that's targeted to a much younger audience. So yeah, it's not going to read the same. And so you're not going to have those audiences follow you the way you think you will. They're much more interested in the genre that you're writing than in you writing in that genre. So if you are going to take this approach and you're just going to write a second novel, great. But if you want it to actually benefit you from a marketing standpoint, I highly recommend that it's in the same genre, because that's how you're going to build your fan base. The next thing I talked about was the standalone series. It's the same character, new situation. So we write a novel about Tim, and then we write another novel about Tim. Same world, just it has nothing to do with the first book. It doesn't have to be read in any order. Nothing that happened in the first book is going to be called back to or relied upon for the reader. And there is a huge market for this of, readers that they want to just read just this one book, and they love the character and they love the world, but they don't want to have to dedicate a ton of their brain power to remembering everything that happened in the series. They liked what you did, and they want to kind of go on another adventure with that character. So again, you write another one about Tim. Again, not related to anything that happens. You can read them out of order. Doesn't matter. Another one about Tim, another one about Tim, another one about Tim. You can just keep going on with this and build your fan base. And they're all the same character. They're all the same world. But the reader can read them in any order. They're not reliant on any of the other books. This can be very, very popular. And I didn't have an example for the writing of the book because, you're just writing another book. But for this one, let's look at the Jack Reacher series. So for the expansion of it, because that's what we're going to do in a series, the Jack Reacher series by Lee Child thrusts the nomadic ex-military policeman into a myriad of gripping scenarios across the United States and occasionally abroad. Each novel is standalone, however, presenting Reacher with fresh conflicts. This allows Child to explore a diverse array of social issues, cultural or criminal activities, cultural activities, moral dilemmas, the whole 9 yards. So it gives him that ability as a writer to explore different avenues of the human equation that he would like to explore, but he can reliably build a fan base who fall in love with the character. So how is this consistent? Well, it's consistent because despite varying backdrops and plots, a strong sense of consistency is maintained through the character of Jack Reacher himself, his moral code, his physical capabilities, his detective skills. They remain constant throughout the entire series. And that is what the fans fall in love with. And so they have that consistent thread, and they want to continue following this character. But you don't really have to read any of the Jack Reacher stories in order. They're all kind of these standalone entities that allow you to just drop into it. A lot of military sci-fi and stuff like that is more geared toward that. So then we get into spin-off series. In other words, same world, but different characters, meaning you write a story about Tim, but then you write a story about Max. Now it's set in the same world, same physics, same everything, but it's just a completely different character. Maybe Tim makes an appearance. Maybe Tim is dead. Who knows? But, it's still a part of that. And this you can do either way. You could have it. A lot of people do this where it doesn't matter about the order. So it's more like that standalone series, but it can also be more episodic, like we're going to talk about in a second. So it depends on what you're going for, but this can kind of go either way. But when we finish writing a story about Max, we can write a story about Mia, and then Ava, and then Jan, and then Bob. They're all set in the same world. That is the thing that attracts the reader to it and keeps them engaged. But now we're just exploring different parts of that world. The Discworld series by Terry Pratchett is a great example of this. So how does it expand? Pratchett's Discworld series explores different aspects of the same world through various sub-series. So some of them are standalone, but some of them are 2 or 3 book series, each focusing on a different character and different themes and a different part of the world. This approach allows for a broad exploration of the world's culture, politics, and peculiarities. It is a comedy series, so there's a lot of, the world is hilarious, and so this allows him to explore that by not sticking with the same character. But the consistency is maintained through reoccurring characters, because even like in the Rincewood series, you meet this orangutan who is a librarian, and there was magic involved. Eventually, you actually are in a story where you are the orangutan librarian. So, we've met the orangutan previous, and I'm pretty sure Rincewind even makes an appearance in that story. It's been a while since I've read it, but that's the consistency that's going to keep the readers through it. So we have reoccurring characters, reoccurring locations. We have a coherent set of physical and magical laws that the world is based off of. And then, all of that is how Pratchett keeps the series consistent. Again, it's a comedy. So his satirical tone and humor provide kind of a unifying thread across a diverse narratives. It's the same exact genre. And so that is what he's leaning on to make it consistent and keep those readers engaged. But honestly, you can read, matter of fact, you can go out and find one website that says, here's the order you should read the Discworld series. And you find another website that says a completely different, here's the order you should read the Discworld series in, because there is some debate in the Discworld community about that. But it's fine. That's how we do it. We're building a fan base. That's why we're writing series, is because the hardest thing to do is to build a fan base. And so by doing subsequent books is how you're going to achieve that. The episodic, same character next day. So we're going to write a story about Tim, and then we're going to write another story about Tim. Now, everything that happened in that first book happened. It's canon. It all pertains to the second book. It all is related. We're going to call back to it. It is literally it's not a contiguous story, because of the fact that the first book was completely standalone. You can read it and understand it. And the second one is completely standalone. You can read it and understand it, except for what gets called back to. You're going to miss elements of that if you try to read them out of order. But some episodic series can be picked up. A lot of TV shows are episodic, like Star Wars, Next Generation, especially like season 1 and season 2. You can sit down and watch any of those episodes and you'll be fine. Now, when you get deeper into the series and you start getting, some of the history of Worf and Deanna Troi and everything else, then it starts to get a little harder to just fall into an episode. There's still plenty of standalone episodes, but they do start threading this story through more episodes than just one. But after that one, you write another one, you write another one. And again, they're all they're all standalone to a point, but everything that happened before it matters. So it behooves the reader to actually read them in order, because you will pick up things in earlier books that you'll need for later books. Now, a wise person who's doing this will thread story elements that eventually climax later in the series. So we're going to add elements in the first one that aren't relevant necessarily to the plot of the first book, but eventually we're going to keep growing that story arc through book after book after book until we have the climax at the end, where we not only complete, all of the, whatever the book is about, but we also do this. And actually, usually the last one, by that point, the last book normally becomes the story of the thing that we've been kind of threading through the whole time. So it doesn't necessarily have its own different arc. I mean, it does, because it's the culmination of what we've been kind of hinting at through this entire series. So the obvious example of this is the Harry Potter series. Rowling gradually introduces the reader to the wider wizarding world beyond Hogwarts, including the Ministry of Magic, international wizardry, and the backstory of the First Wizarding War. That's how she's expanding her universe book after book. Each book builds on the last, revealing more of the world's history, politics, and dark creatures. We're just going to continue to expand it. That's what the readers love. They love to learn more and more and more about the world, and that's what's keeping them there. And as far as how does she keep it consistent, she does that through meticulous planning and detailed backstory. She keeps the series' internal logic consistent. This allows her to introduce new elements like the Horcruxes that are threaded through the whole Voldemort story arc. Obviously is introduced in the very beginning, and then it gets threaded through the entire thing until the final climax in book 7. And these elements that they're adding, they feel integral to the world. Even though she's adding these new elements, the way she planned out her world means that she can add new elements and it still feels like it's a part of that world. It doesn't feel like you're just coming out of left field with this new topic or this new idea, because it's consistent with everything that we've been introducing before. And then the reason for that is because she's subtly foreshadowing things as each book is progressing, so that when she foreshadows something in this book, when it gets introduced in a later book, you feel like you kind of knew that it was a part of the world, as opposed to just, I call this the 400 foot of rope phenomenon. One of the worst books that I was ever sent to try and book doctor. I couldn't do it. It was beyond even my capabilities. So there was a scene where the hero was trapped on a 400-foot cliff. And it said the hero is trapped on a 400-foot cliff with no way off. Luckily, he remembered to bring 400 foot of rope. And I'm like, okay, so first of all, 400 foot of rope is a lot. Like, we haven't seen this. Like, where is it? Is it wrapped around his body? That's a heavy 400 foot of rope is heavy. Like, this has never bothered him before. And 400 exactly. He's on a 400-foot cliff, and he has not 380 foot of rope, not 420 foot of rope, but exactly 400. So that's what I call this, the 400 foot of rope phenomenon. You do not want to have that happen. You need to set these elements and then bring them in. That's called a plot device, and I'll chase that rabbit here real quick. I like to teach plot devices as if you were a farmer. When you're a farmer, you can't just walk out to a field and reap your crop. You have to plant it, and then you have to tend it, and then you can reap it. Plot devices are that exact same way. So if you're going to have 400 foot of rope when he gets stuck on a 400 foot rope or a 400 foot cliff, then you can't reap it. You have to go back and find a place where you plant it. He's at a store and he's buying equipment, and he's like, hey, that looks really heavy, but I'm going to buy it. And then you have to tend it, which means maybe he struggles fighting because he's got 400 foot of rope wrapped around his waist or whatever. Maybe he struggles swimming across the river because it's weighing him down. That's another tend. We want to try and tend it as many times as we can. And then when you reap it, it doesn't come out of nowhere. The audience knows that this has been a part of this, and hey, look, now we get payoff of it. So that's how she keeps her consistency to the world. Technically, every book is kind of standalone. They have a start, a middle, and an end. Yes, it is definitely reliant on everything that happened in the past, but the individual story is a story. We have an introduction to that story. We have a build up through the act 2 of that story, and then we have a climax in act 3. It's done. It's settled. And then we have those elements that are threaded through. The next thing I talked about or the last thing I talked about was serials. So a serial, it's one contiguous story. It is. It's 100% absolutely just a story. It technically is a 3-act play. Now, like I said, I'm writing a 5-novel series in my current work in progress. It's still a 3-act play. It still has an introduction and a beginning, and then it rises through Act 2, and it culminates at the end. And I'm going to talk a lot about serial stories because that's where my bread and butter is through this class. But the big thing to understand is just because it's one story, and this is where people fail, and this is where they upset their readers, they lose their readers, and no one finishes their saga because they forget that every book still has to be a story. Noticed I used the exact same graphics on there. Book 1 is still a complete story. It has an Act 1 and Act 2 and Act 3. It rises and falls, and it culminates into a very satisfying ending. It's just that the story doesn't end. And then we go into next book, and we're going to have it's going to be its own book. But again, unlike Harry Potter, where we have these very tight, complete stories, we're going to have a lot more ambiguity through this, but you still have to satisfy the reader. I was beta reading one not too long ago where book 1 ends. The whole book is about getting to this battle. And so they go through, and it's all these trials and tribulations, and it's all this buildup and hype, and we finally top the hill, and we look at the battlefield, and then it says to be continued. No one's going to be continued. Everyone's going to be furious, and they're not going to get that next book. I'm going to talk about cliffhangers a little later in this, but if you want to commit suicide writing a serial series, that's how you do it. You do not satisfy your readers in any way. You basically just snub your nose at them and say, tough, you'll wait. They will not. They will just be furious, and they're going to put you down. Some will, obviously, but the vast majority, that's where you're going to have a huge fall off of readership because they're going to be furious at you. So that's the hard thing about writing a contiguous story like this, is that, yes, it's got to be a contiguous story. It can't end. There has to be plenty in it that pulls the reader and makes them want to read that next book. But every book still has to be satisfying on their own, just like the Harry Potter series. So obviously, a great example of that is Lord of the Rings. So Tolkien's trilogy significantly expands the intricate world first introduced in The Hobbit. So this is kind of a continuation. The series explores diverse landscapes from the Shire to Mordor. We delve into rich histories, language, and cultures of its various races and realms. And then each book continues the central quest to destroy the One Ring. The One Ring is introduced at the very beginning. We have to destroy the One Ring. We know the conflict. We know the stakes. We know everything. But each book, and which is actually amazing, and I almost didn't use Lord of the Rings as my example here, because for those that don't know the history of Lord of the Rings, it was written as one book. It's a standalone book. There is no trilogy in the Lord of the Rings. However, when Tolkien turned it in 1953 or whatever, there was not a printer in the world that could print a book that big. So the publisher, not Tolkien, decided to cut it into 3 parts. It just happens that they kind of got lucky, and there was this, kind of good stopping point for each one of them. But I almost didn't use it because it's not the perfect example. I almost used the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan because that is much more in line with the fact of, every book was designed to have a satisfying ending, yet the story is absolutely not over. But not everybody has read that. Lord of the Rings is just too much in the culture to not use it for this example. So how do we keep it consistent? So throughout, Tolkien maintains consistency with his character development, thematic elements, and the internal logic of Middle-earth mythology. Central characters such as Frodo, Sam, Gandalf, and Aragorn exhibit consistent growth throughout the entire thing. And then again, I could say he cheated because he kept consistent because it was just one book. But no one, except for people that are in the know about that history. Most people just think it was made as a trilogy, and for all intents and purposes, it is. So that's the main types of series that we're going to think about. But how are we going to do that? How are we going to get into this? Whether you're a plotter or a discovery writer, if you're going to write a series, you have to plan. Like, you have to. If you're completely averse to plotting and it literally makes you break out in hives and you puke endlessly, then just don't write series. Like if you physically cannot stand plotting and planning, then great. This is not for you. Do something else. There's that first thing that I talked about, which was just write another book. Just make sure it's in the same genre if you want to build your market, but write another book. And then you don't have to plan. You can continue being a discovery writer. You can have, no idea of where the story's going when you begin. You can just start writing and somehow reach an ending, and, you're fine. You can still build an audience that way. It is great. But if you're going to do any of the others, you have to spend some amount of time thinking about it. There's no way to do it other than that. So the more you can figure out before you start writing the first book, the better you will be at reaching a climactic end that ties things together from beginning to end. It's just the fact of what it is. So it's just, planning is everything. Now, maybe you've written that first book and at the end of it, you were like, wow, I actually have now this, I could continue this. I could actually do another book because of XYZ. Great. You didn't think about it before, but now you're thinking about it now. So now's the time you have to plan. You should have planned, for it at the very beginning, so you could add some stuff to that first book that would foreshadow and set up a longer arc, but you didn't. No problem. There's plenty of series out there that started as one book that the author had no idea they were going to ever write another book in this. And then when they got to the end of it, they were like, oh, wow, I could actually continue this. And so then they do. And then that's when you start doing, some of these foreshadows and dropping all these things that we're going to talk about here in a second. So it just is the way it is. If you're not a plotter, if you cannot stomach the idea of planning at all, then, you've got a couple options. You've got the standalone. You've got like the Jack Reacher series where you're just going to keep the same character, Poirot, as far as the detective is concerned. Those are all standalone books. You don't have to read them in any order. So, you don't have to plan anything. You just have to plan that book. And then that's it. And if that book gets written or read before the first book, oh, well, it doesn't matter because nothing's really connected to each other than this one character. And so, if that's you, then stick with those first two. If you are going to tread into the other domains, you're going to have to plan. There's just no way around it. You have to think about this stuff. This is so much bigger than just one story arc. And if you decide, and I call it pantsing because obviously I'm a plotter, if you're going to pants it, which means write by the seat of your pants, and you try to do a saga like that, you're going to end up with so much inconsistencies and so much incongruities. And you're going to have so many 400 foot of rope moments that you're just going to upset the readers anyway. So just don't try. You've got other options that you can write multiple books, do that. And that's your writing style. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you're like me, who is an insane plotter that literally spends years, I spent 3 years just working on accents for the world. So, I spent a lot of time thinking about stories. That's when you can step into these more complex story arcs. So let's talk about world building. In my opinion, if you're going to write a series, world building is the most important aspect. More important than your characters, more important than your plot, more important than anything. The world that you create. So fans of series they will love your world way more than you do. They will take your writing more seriously, way more than you do. They will hunt you down and, like in Misery, break your ankles if you take things in the wrong direction. They're brutal, especially epic fantasy fans. But it really is that important. It is the foundation of everything you're going to create. It is the thing. Even like my podcast partner, Marie, she's not a plotter. She's a pantser. However, she plots her worlds out tremendously because she understood from the early parts of her career that everything relied on that, everything. And so she pantses her stories, but she spent a lot of time working on the world. The world sets a stage for your narrative, and it influences every single element that you're going to do for the rest of your story. Cultures, social structures, economies, political systems, religions, just the tip of the iceberg. All of these impact every story you create in the world. They're all going to be a part of it. Even if your story isn't a political one, the politics are still going to be there. Politics still affect life. Maybe you're writing a story where the character's, complete atheist. Doesn't matter if you have a religion in the world, it's going to be there. It's going to touch that story in some way. Otherwise, the world is not going to feel real. It's not going to feel like it's a living, breathing thing. So I'm going to go through several things about world building because it is that important. We really, really need to focus on our world building above everything else. And if you are a pantser, like, Maria is a epic fantasy writer and she's a pantser, she still spends a ton of time thinking about this. So consistency is the name of the game. Your world's rules must stay consistent for your readers to be able to suspend disbelief and fully immerse themselves in the stories. Nothing upsets fans more than when you break your own rules, period. You want to see a bunch of really upset Star Wars fans, watch them after they came out with some of these new movies where they completely took everything that was factual in the Star Wars universe and threw it out the window and just did something completely different. That's how you lose fans. And that's why the last Star Wars movie that came out literally lost like $300 million. A movie that should literally make money if it sneezes lost a buttload of money. Because in the couple movies before that, you did this. You broke your own rules for no reason. Like, you can break your own rules. You can set things up and you can, whatever. I mean, in Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, he introduces the elements of magic, and he's like, and I can't remember the number, it's been too long, but he's like, there are 7 elements of magic and that's it, and there's no more. Now there's a rumor of an 8th, but it doesn't exist, so don't even worry about that. There's only these 7. Like, okay, so there's an 8th. We know it, we get it, and that's kind of in your face, and a little heavy-handed for me, but still, that is that's coming. So even though we broke our rule of only 7 elements of magic, we prep the reader and they know it's coming. So you can break your own rules, but you just have to do it in a very kid gloves kind of way. You have to always make sure that your audience is not going to be offended by what you're doing. They're going to be excited and blown away by this new element or this bending of your rules or whatever. But really, consistency. I can't stress that enough. So the better you understand your world, the better you can look for organic ways to thread in your story. Do not info dump about your world. They don't need it. They don't want it. You haven't earned their concern or care yet. Don't do it. The number one thing that I talk about in my writer's room week after week after week is, people will bring their opening chapter. And I'm like, why do I need to know the history of this sword? Well, it's important to the story. Yeah, is it important to this moment? The kid's robbing a apple cart. Why do I need to know the story of this mythical sword? Well, I mean, yeah, I don't care. You haven't earned my concern yet. You haven't earned my loyalty yet. Give me the mythical sword information when it matters to me. When you've actually earned the fact that, oh, wow, I really like this story, I'm going to find out about it. Your opening scene is there to hook the reader into the character's life. And if the character is a street rat robbing an apple cart, they don't know nothing. That magical, mythical sword doesn't mean anything to them. Their life, their belly is empty, and they're worried about filling it. And that's the hook, and that's what's going to get me into your story, and that's what's going to make me empathize and care with this character. The magical sword history is not. So it's the number one thing that I'm constantly hammering on people that are training under me is stop. You are the only one at the beginning of your story that loves your world because you spend a lot of time thinking about it. You're it. No one else cares. Stop shoving it on them until you've earned it. Eventually you're going to earn it, and they're going to be like, oh my God, I cannot wait to learn more about this world. Then that's when they care. And that's when you start giving it to them. So the reason why you spend time thinking about your world and planning out your world and all this other stuff is because then when you're running a scene that has nothing to do with something, and yet you come upon a moment where you're like, ooh, opportunity. So as an example, in my podcast that just dropped this week, we're talking about dialogue. And so we're going through, it's part 2 of our dialogue session. And in this one, we're actually reading our own work and kind of showing you why we chose to do certain things when we did it. And as a side note, I went, oh, and look at this, because there's a moment where it says, main character's heart drop when he realized that he's going to have to spend 2 moons out at sea. And then the character thinks like, oh my God, 10 days out without ever seeing land. What's that going to be like? Now, this is chapter 10. So I've already taught the audience that a moon is a month. I've already taught the readers that 10 days is a week, and it's 10 days because literally it's in the name. I've already taught them that. So they already know. However, as I'm writing this scene, I go, oh, look, good opportunity to reinforce that there are 10 days and 2 moons. So it's organic. No reader goes, oh my goodness, look at him. He's just bashing me on the head with this information. The kid is literally like, 6 weeks at sea. This is terrible. So it absolutely is organic. It absolutely feels like it's exactly what would happen in that moment, but it's actually there to just kind of hit the reader and say, hey, remember, a moon is a month. And remember, there's 10 days in a moon. So it's just, you're looking for that. But if you don't know your world to the degree that now when you run into these situations without realizing that they're going to be an opportunity for threading in organically your world building, you won't be able to take advantage of those. So you absolutely need to understand your world, because it's how you can organically thread that world in without being an info dump demon. And the caveat to that is, because everybody asks me, like, how do you organically thread things in? It's very simple. You reveal the world as your character interacts with it, or as the world interacts with your character. It's in the moment. If the magic sword is somehow interacting with the kid while he's trying to steal an apple in the apple cart, then I would get the opportunity to introduce that. But it's probably not, so I'm not. So that's just the way it is. And that's actually how I set scenes too, just to chase another rabbit. How do you set scenes without having 3 paragraphs at the beginning that says, this is what everything looks like? Boring, boring, boring. No, you just have the character doing his thing or her thing. And then you allow that character in every single paragraph to interact with something, or in every single paragraph, something interacts with them. The wind, I don't say it was a windy day. No, the wind is going to blow a hat off their head or whatever. It's going to interact with them, and the reader's going to go, oh, wow, it's a windy day, without me saying it's a windy day. Like, I don't want to tell my reader things. I want to show them. I want them to experience things. It is the exact same thing with world building. These are new. These are complex, especially when you step into my realm of epic fantasy, where my world doesn't exist at all. The physics, the magic, the politics, the religion, none of it is real. And I have to teach all of it to the reader. You still have to be smart about it. You still cannot bore your readers. So another super important thing about why it is so important to think about your world building. And then, not last, but something that is near and dear to my heart, while your fake world is fake, it is 100% real to your characters. And you need to treat it that way. Because again, I said earlier, your readers care way more about your world than you do. Even if you absolutely love it to the nth degree, they still love it more. They're always going to, if you've done your job. When you don't treat your world as real, it comes across in the writing, and it comes across to the readers, and they are not happy with you. Like, one of the things, I'm going to show my age a little bit here, but about 20 years ago now, probably, HBO came out with a series with Lucy Lawless was in it, called Rome. It was okay. It was pretty well done, and I'm not going to talk about any of that. The thing that really blew my mind and made me giddy from a fan perspective and from a writer's perspective, it was the first time I had ever seen the characters in Rome treat the Roman religion as a real religion. I don't care what you feel about religion. I don't care if you're atheist, if you're Christian, whatever, Jewish, Muslim, doesn't matter. If you are religious, you believe that is fact. If you're a Christian, you believe. That's why you're a Christian. Nothing wrong with it. The Romans felt the exact same way. Now we go, oh, that's so silly. I mean, they had a whole pantheon of gods. That's dumb. Yeah, there's like 3 million or 300. Is it 3? I think there's 300 million gods in India. They believe them. They're real. 100%. If you don't believe them and you show that in the writing that the author does not believe in this religion, then it's going to come across in your writing. These characters are living in this world that is real to them. And the more real you make it to them, the more real you make it to the readers. So that's another very important aspect of really understanding and really planning out your world, because you have to buy into it. You have to believe the religion is real. You have to believe the politics the way they are. You have to believe that magic is an actual thing. It isn't some frou-frou bullcrap, fairy dust, rainbow, unicorn fart thing. Like, it's real. And so don't miss this. Don't slack up and put it in, because your readers will feel it and it will turn them off. And then last thing about world building, you're never going to plan everything. I don't care how long you spend. I don't know many people. I mean, Tolkien spent 10 years working on Lord of the Rings. I know he definitely spent more time as me. Very few people will spend more time thinking about their world than I do. And yet I will never come up with everything. So you also have to understand that world building is going to be ever evolving. So while once something is created, it's canon. You write something in a book, you're done. That is the way it is. Sorry, you're stuck with it. If you realize in the next book that you made a mistake, tough. It's just the way it is. You might be able to work a way to bend it or, adjust it or whatever, but you have to do it in a way that the readers won't notice it. There is no way you're going to know everything at the start. You're just not. So one of the things you have to understand when you're writing a saga and a series is you have to understand that your world is going to grow organically in ways that you aren't predicting at the beginning. And you have to allow for that. You have to allow your world to breathe and to grow and to be a living entity. You absolutely want to plan as much as you can. But as MacArthur said, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And the enemy is the words that you're writing in the future. And as soon as your world, your characters, your plot, your story, whatever hits those, all bets are off. Those words are going to do everything in their power to ruin everything you've planned. And that's fine. And you need to allow that to happen. And I don't mean ruin it as in don't break any of the things that we talked about, but you definitely want the world like, oh my goodness, I didn't think about this, but it absolutely totally fits exactly everything that I've already said. And it's, this great idea that it's better than even what I was thinking for this thing. Then let it happen. It fits. It's organic. It's brilliant. The fans are going to love it. It expands the world. It's completely consistent with what you've been creating. And again, when you create a bunch of stuff up front, it is easier to create stuff later that matches all of that, because you have all of this foundation that you've prepared for that is going to allow you to continue coming up with new ideas as you continue through the story. So very important to understand that even though you've spent a ton of time planning and plotting and creating all these different elements of your world, you need to allow yourself the ability to allow that to evolve and grow. All right. I've hammered on world building enough. Let's talk about pacing and tension. So first, know that each book needs to be a story with a beginning, middle, end. I've covered that at the very beginning. I don't care what you're writing, even if you're writing a serial, an epic fantasy saga, every story has to be satisfying. You cannot end at the climax of what you've been building through the whole book. Every time it upsets readers. And yeah, there's even a couple that have made it to, New York Times bestselling level. But for every one of those stories that does something stupid like that and makes it to the New York Times bestseller, there are thousands littering the never been read or, have 1-star reviews and have sold 10 copies graveyard. Don't do that. It just doesn't work. You might get lucky, but if you're worried about getting lucky, just go buy lottery tickets. I live in Las Vegas. We're not allowed to buy lottery tickets because the lottery is illegal here, because we have gambling and they don't want to take away from gambling, which is really silly. But anyway, it's much easier to win the lottery than it is to take a chance like that in a series and have readers actually like what you did. So every story must be a story. It has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, depending on what type of series you're writing, you will need to do the same for your overarching plot. So if you are doing an episodic that's going to have like the Voldemort saga through there, or, the Wheel of Time with the Dark One, whole saga or whatever. That also needs the same thing. So when you're in the early elements of the series, the first book or the first couple of books, depending on how big it is, whatever, you have to think like Act One. You have to be setting up and forgive me, I teach a lot of writing. You can get the books, or you can come to some of my classes, or you can join me in the writer's room. But you have to start with either a state of perfection or a state of imperfection within that story arc. You then have to have an inciting incident. You then have to have a point of no return. You then have to grow through that. Now, but we're talking about growing through, books 2, 3, 4. And then you have to have, your act 3. You have to come down and have that climax at the end. So you have to treat it like a story, even though it's more subliminal, it's more subplot, especially in the beginning. It's going to be much smaller little things. You still have to think about it as if it's a story. You still have to run it through the same process. Otherwise, it will not be satisfactory to the readers. If it just starts in Act 3, no one wants that. Again, that's that 400 foot of rope phenomenon, but now you're doing it on a plot level, which is even worse. So depending on what you're doing, you need to think about that. Because that's that little thread. When you treat that thread as its own story, that is one of the biggest ways to keep your tension and pacing going. As always, consistency is the name of the game. Things like magic and physics are just the beginning. Your author voice, the tone of your story, the pace you hold through the story, your sentence structure, your paragraph structure, how you run your characters' attitudes. We got in a discussion in the writer's room in the last critique pod where somebody asked me about what should they do to avoid characters who do something inconsistent. They're like, I'm reading this book and this character did something that I absolutely do not think this character would do. I don't want to do that because I, as the reader, hated it, and I don't want my readers hating that. And so we went down that path. All of these are important. I mean, I threw out the Terry Pratchett series. Like, one of the big things for that is how it's his British humor. It's this really weird way of looking at things in a comedic way that I can't do. I'm a dark, epic, tragic fantasy writer. My stories tend to be blood and gore and death and pain. But and not to use Terry Pratchett, but the line I usually use for this is actually Douglas Adams from his Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Same types of writers. They're both British. One's writing sci-fi comedy and the other's writing fantasy comedy. But there's a line that I always quote in the Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that says, and I'm going to butcher it, but it basically says, the large square Volgon ship floated or hovered in the air exactly the way bricks don't. And so it's just a way of looking at it. But that's not just that one line. Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett use that same type of looking at things in a very weird way that just builds this dichotomy that is very interesting and very funny. That must be consistent. So it's not just the world needs to be consistent. It's everything else as well. The readers need to feel like they're reading the same world. And one of the ways you're going to do that is how you're crafting the prose. So this has nothing to do with the world. It has to do with words, how you're doing your sentences, your paragraph structure, all of that. So all of that must be consistent as well. And that will help in your pacing and tension. While each book must be consistent and must be a complete story, I should have put that in there, you must also keep things fresh. You just have to. So as the saga goes on, as the series goes on, whatever it is, you're going to have to add new places, new characters, new events, new stakes. Otherwise, you're writing the same thing. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. If you've ever read one Nora Roberts book, you've read all Nora Roberts books. However, she's made 1,000,000 times more than I will probably ever make in my entire career. So I'm not knocking her in any way, shape, or form. There's an audience that wants the same books basically over and over again with just different window dressing. They want different characters, different situations of whatever. So she is absolutely doing this part. She's changing places, characters, events, and stakes, but she's very formulaic in her structure. They all roll about the exact same way. John Grisham is the same way. Very, very successful, but all they're really doing is changing these. That's not really what I would consider a series, but it's still the way they're maintaining pacing and tension throughout their entire series. So you need to think about that as you're moving forward. The story has to grow. Again, depending on what it is, all those different types we talked about. And you're going to have to add things as the story goes through. Another thing to think about with pacing isn't just how fast the reader is moving through the plot of the book. Your series needs to take the reader on an emotional journey. The emotional stakes also need to rise. However, you also need to allow time for your reader to breathe and digest the experience. Especially, this is near and dear to my heart because I am a very tragic, dark, epic fantasy writer. I can't just throw my readers into the abyss of hell and torture them for 5 novels. No one is going to be able to suffer through that. So as low as I take my readers, I also take them the opposite in high. And that's also where you get that roller coaster ride. You know, if this is your baseline of your story, if your story does this, if it gets, oh, it's kind of cool, and oh, look, it's kind of scary, or, you know, kind of bad, or, oh, look, it's kind of good, then this is the emotional journey your reader takes. If you go, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. Oh my God, I really want to kill myself. Oh my God, this is the best thing ever. Oh my God, I want to kill myself. Then this is your emotional journey that your reader takes. And that's what I tend to do because I go very, very, very dark. So I go very, very, very light, whatever you want to say. I make sure my readers have moments of just ecstasy and love and just feel good moments because I'm absolutely going to make you feel the worst that humanity can bring. So you need to think about that. However, you still have to have times where that middle time where your readers have the ability to kind of digest what they both coming down and going up, like it just the way it is. They have to digest that. And so you need to look for things that are going to allow them to do that. And so that's how you keep your pacing and tension. Now that's more for any book, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to do it through your series as well. And then again, if you're treating that overall arcing story arc as a story, then you're also going to do the same kind of wavelength through it, even though it's going to be more subtle. It's going to be more of a you know, subplot kind of thing. But you're still looking for those opportunities. Now, let's talk about transitioning between books. In each book, you need to resolve the key conflicts that were explored in that book. Again, do not end at the climax of what you've been building to through a book. You will fail 99% of the time. So each book needs to resolve the key conflicts that were explored in that book. However, if you're writing a series, you also want to set up new ones that will pull the reader into the next book. This should be done towards the end, usually, and it should be done in a way that creates interest, not rage, over things that should have been answered in this book. It's new things. There's like, oh, wow, okay, that's interesting. I mean, I'm satisfied with this ending. I was concerned about this whole thing. I've been driven through this whole thing. You know, we've been going on this adventure. We are now satisfied. But look at that. That's something interesting. I really enjoyed this journey. I'm going to continue and find out about that. Now, I don't usually talk negative about things as a reader because people, when they see me as an instructor, they confuse the fact that I'm also a fan. As a fan, everything's subjective. So this is me talking as a fan, not as a writer or a writing instructor. For Terry Goodkind's Sword of Truth series, all my friends were into it. I mean, you're talking about I was probably 13, 14 when I read this. It's a very old series. And when it came out, everybody was talking about it. So I was like, all right, fine, I'll pick it up. And I read the first book. There was nothing wrong with it. But, you know, from a subjective standpoint, it just didn't hook me. But the version that I had actually had the first couple of chapters of book 2. And so I was like, well, I own the book. Let me read the couple chapters. And I got to the end of those chapters and I was like, yeah, no, I'm good. I'm good. And I've never read anything in that series past that because it didn't do anything. And again, we're not talking about from a writing standpoint. We're just talking about from a fan standpoint. He did not, in me, and I'm not saying he didn't do it because obviously it's a multi-million copy saga. It's great for a bunch of people. But for me, he did not do this. He did not build anything in the end of that first book that gave me the interest. And even after reading the first couple of chapters of the next book, which is really where you should have your hook for that book itself. Like, you should do it in this book, but I even gave him the opportunity to step into his next book and he didn't hook me. So You really should do that. That's what he failed me on as a reader. Again, multi-million copy selling series. I'm not downing the series in any way, shape, or form. This is what you're trying to do. You're trying to make sure that as many readers as possible get hooked at the end of that book. And that actually may be it. The beginning of the second book was a little slower than it should have been, probably. And again, I haven't read it since I was 14. So, I'm literally just kind of making this up as I'm going. But more than likely, at the end of the first book, it was an end of a first book. He just ended the story, and it was finished. It was complete. There was no loose ends. There were no plot threads that didn't get resolved or anything like that. And so, since I didn't bring anything from that first book going, ooh, I really want to find out about this, and since he started the second book off a little slower than I wanted to see, I'm done. I'm out, and I've never read anything since then. So take that as for what it's worth. That's from a fan perspective. These are what we're trying to do. At the end of the book, we're trying to make sure that we hook the reader into the next book without making them angry that they didn't get the answers that they were looking for in this book. So it's a hard balancing act, but that's what we're looking for. Your characters are your bridge between your stories. Make sure they are continuously in development. Your characters have to grow in a story. If you're writing multiple stories, they have to grow in every story. And that can be difficult. Especially, I meet so many writers that make one of the biggest mistakes that I see in character development, where they fall in love with their character and they're really fantasy fulfilling in their writing, which is dangerous. I love what I do. I love my stories. I'm a huge epic fantasy fan, but I don't give a crap about my characters. From a fan standpoint, the fans care about them a lot, but I can't allow myself to care about them in that way, in a fan way, because then I'll want to give them more than they should get for the story. I'll make them too powerful. I'll give them too many breaks. I'll do whatever. And I don't want to do that. I want them to struggle. I want them to work. I want them to have to blood, sweat, and tears to get to the end. So it's a very satisfying ending for the reader. Because again, they're fantasy fulfilling through my story. I need to avoid fantasy. But I see so many writers do that where, and so, if you're writing a series and you start off with the farm boy, and at the end of the series, he's the best mage and the best fighter and the best, king in the whole world. Where do you go? He's the best. And you're going to write 3 more books, 2 more books, 5 more books in the series. He's the best. What are you going to do? So be careful with that. Your characters do need to continuously grow book after book after book. Harry Potter, she did a great job with. He grows in every single book, but he doesn't become the Harry Potter of book 7 until book 7. That's the one where he's grown enough, he's taken enough damage, he's realized how dark things can get, and now his attitude is equally proportionate to the world that he's now fighting. And so that's a great learning experience there, to watch a character that organically grows in every single book to the right level until we get to the level that we need to be to actually overcome Voldemort at the very end. So their growth in one book should set the stage for new growth and new challenges in future volumes. That's what you're looking to do. You don't want to give them everything. You want to give them enough that goes, oh, okay, you're here, kid, but you got a long way to go. And so you allow them to get that in the next book, and that'll open it up. And you need to pay attention to that as you're transitioning from book to book to book. As I already said, your world is the foundation. Regardless of which type of series you're writing, your world is your foundation, except for that first one, we're just writing a bunch of books. But each subsequent volume should add a layer or 2 of complexity on top of what the reader has already learned. Readers who read series, one of the things that attracts them to it is they want to learn the world. If you give them everything about the world in book 1, and then they just live in the same world for the next 3 books, 5 books, 2 books, whatever, you have literally taken something away from them that they want. They want exploration of the world. They want exploration of the magic system. They want exploration of the physics. They want exploration of politics and religion and society and everything else. You must give that to them, just like you have to do in that first book. So that's another thing of why, when you really understand the world and you understand that it's not about giving them everything in the world, it's about giving them what they need now, then as the character grows through the world can grow along with the character. And then that gives the reader that exploration aspect of a series that they want to get. So very, very important. It'll help you in your transitioning from book to book to book. One of the biggest things that people struggle with, I think, in transitioning from book to book to book is, what do I do about, when I bring something up that hasn't, like, let's say I'm in book 3 and I'm bringing something up that hasn't been talked about since book 1. What do I do? Very simple. Don't treat your readers like an idiot. That's it. They're intelligent people. So yes, you will constantly need to remind them of things, especially if that thing hasn't appeared in a while, but do so with care. Give them just enough to remind them, but not so much that you're insulting them. A great example is what I talked about the moons and the 10-day. No one is going to get offended by that line. No one. And if you are, then you are way too sensitive to be reading me. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for these organic ways to make sure that the reader can remember, can pull up whatever these things as we're going through it. But don't info dump again. I mean, like, one of my favorite professional reviews of my work, I'm going to pat myself on the back. I will try not to break my own arm. But this professional reviewer said, if you took Robert Jordan, who's my favorite fantasy author, if you took Robert Jordan and cut out half the stuff that shouldn't be in the book, you get Maxwell Alexander Drake. While I love Jordan, and I consider him one of my biggest mentors, he wrote a lot of stuff that didn't need to be in a book. He wrote a lot of descriptions. Now, because I know, one of the things that he did was he found macros for the first time back when the digital world was just coming out. And so what he decided to do was he would write a macro where he would describe something in great detail, like massive detail. And then the next time he hit that thing, he would run that macro, and then he would just edit out a bunch of it. But it was a lot the same. And then the next time he hit that item thing, whatever, he would run the macro again and then edit out a bunch of stuff, but it was still the same. And so he did that every single time. And so his books are fairly bloated with a bunch of information that you already know. You absolutely already know. So be careful with that. You just understand that they are intelligent people. And, I say all the time, if you can't keep up with me as a reader, there are other writers out there. Like, if I'm too smart for you as a writer, then it's not that you're dumb. It's just that I'm not the writer for you. There are other writers out there that will bring it down, whatever, give you a little bit more information than I do. I don't baby my readers. You have to keep up. It's just the way it is. And that's the type, and my fan base wants that. And so you always have to target whatever your fan base is. I'm not targeting, and again, look at what I said earlier about the Magic Fall series versus my normal, like, epic fantasy. A lot of my epic fantasy fans, of course, they want to read anything that I'm doing. So they'll go and checking out Magic Falls, and they're like, it just really wasn't for me. Well, of course not. You're a fan that doesn't want to be babied in any way, shape, or form. And now we're writing this YA thing that we're going to baby the reader just a little bit more than we would normally do. And so, yeah, that's not going to be your thing, because you're not the target market. I'm glad that you went and got the book. Thank you so much. But I mean, it's YA sci-fi fantasy. It's not epic fantasy. This is what you're a fan of. So just understand that. And you look for, again, I know I use this word a lot, look for organic ways to remind them how to do it. All right, let's move on. I think this may be the last section of it. I didn't realize we're already in an hour. I'll try to pick up the pace a little bit. So where to start? And this really is more of advice for all books, but really everything should start in media res, which means in the middle of things. So you need to start in some type of scene that has the gravitas to immediately grab the reader. That's what we're doing at the beginning of a book. Action, sure, absolutely. You can start in action. That's something that a lot of people say. I very rarely start a story in action. Not that I don't do it, but I definitely do it less. And I'm most famous for my action scenes. Like, that's my number one strength as a writer, is action scenes. And yet probably only 20% of the time do I start a novel or start a story arc in an action scene. because the emotional moments, the personal crisis, stuff like that, they are immensely relatable to the audience. And if it has the gravitas to grab the reader, it's going to do a better job of connecting the reader to the character. I know I'm over time, but it's a really good story to illustrate this point. My first book that I sold, the acquisition editor on it was a guy named Patrick Labruto. He was Raymond Feist's first editor, Stephen King's, Isaac Asimov's. He was big editor. And I start off with this big lion dude in chapter 1, and he's just in a cell. Nothing happens. He's in a cell. No one comes into the cell. He doesn't leave the cell. We're just in the cell. Some people come talk to him, but that's it. And then his next chapter, which is, I think, chapter 3, is this massive fight scene because he's a 7.5 foot tall, 850 pound lion dude. And so, it's great. And Patrick was like, look, you're one of the best action writers I've ever read. That's your chapter 1. Rewrite this. That has to be chapter 1. I was like, I don't. He's like, dude, you're a first time writer. You don't know anything. I'm Patrick Labruto. Do what I tell you. And so I spent a couple months and I rewrote everything. I had to rewrite like the first 10 chapters to get it to work. And when I turned it in, he's like, what do you think? I was like, I don't think. He's like, yeah, you're a first time writer. Shut up. Do what I tell you. And then a week later, he called me back and he was like, so I'm going to say something to you I've never said to a first time writer. And if you ever tell anybody I said this, I will say you're lying. You're right. This doesn't work. And I don't know why. And that blew my mind because I knew why. Without that scene of being in the cell with him and getting to know his emotional moments and his personal crisis, he's a 7.5 foot lion dude that weighs 850 pounds just killing things. Who cares? Yeah, I wrote it great. So what? And so the book was published the way I originally wrote it, with that scene up front. So don't discount that. Yes, action, great, awesome. But action doesn't necessarily, depending on how it's written, doesn't necessarily grab the reader and make them want to continue reading that book, even if you're really good at writing it. So do not discount your emotional moment, your personal crisis, and all of that. As each book should have its own significant event that changes the character and world, starting just after that, and allowing the reader to see how the last book affected the characters and the world around them is a powerful way to start your next story. So in other words, on your subsequent books, if you're writing series that matter for the past books, use the past books. That gives you a lot of gravitas right up front, that big emotional moment when we're there. I mean, think about Star Wars and the arc that Luke Skywalker takes. We are absolutely, especially the last movie, The Return of the Jedi, very much plays on all of those. A couple of tips for transition: make sure that each book has a satisfying ending. I know I've said that a lot, but look, I can't stress enough. I don't care what you're doing. Even if you write even if you're writing a serial series like I do, you must give the reader something to be satisfied with at the end of every volume. And I've hammered on that, so I'm not going to stick with that. This means that your characters need to reach some turning point or resolution in their personal journey in every single novel. They don't or shouldn't achieve their final transformation, as we already talked about, but there should be something the reader can see grow book after book after book after book. We talked about this a little bit, but just to kind of put a nail in it, just before as well as during the climax, start weaving in your elements that are going to carry the reader into the next volumes. And again, when you do that, they still get the satisfying ending because you're not ending what we've been struggling through. You're just starting to set up what we're going to be doing in the future. So a new threat, unresolved subplot. Notice that I marked sub in subplot, unresolved subplot. Or perhaps a character makes a decision that will have great implications on their future. They make a stupid decision or whatever. Notice these are not cliffhangers. Cliffhangers are not what you think they are. Cliffhangers tend to piss people off more than they help your story. So yes, I use cliffhangers, but I do them in very, very specific ways. And it's always because I have fulfilled them before the cliffhanger. The cliffhanger is never the story that I've been, forcing my reader to come through. It's a cliffhanger of something else. And then leave questions unanswered. Very, very important. Again, not the main plot. I know I'm hammering on that, but you definitely want that. Leaving some questions unanswered is fine and absolutely needed. These will compel the readers to continue reading to get those answers. And then last, as with all stories, each ending should have a strong emotional impact upon the character and by extension, the reader, each book of the series. Doing so will ensure the reader has a desire to come back for more of that yummy emotional fulfillment. So, and if this book ends that way, they're coming back for the next. That's just the way it is. So each book, and again, I'm hammering on that, each book has to have its own story. So if you like the way I teach, there's a lot of ways to get information about me. I do have a podcast that has over 100 episodes now, Releasing Your Inner Dragon. It is literally available everywhere podcasts are available, including on YouTube if you actually want to watch us. So like the dialogue one where we're actually sharing our screen and reading, it's on YouTube. So just look up Releasing Your Inner Dragon and you will find our podcast. As Monique showed you, I do have 3 books that are out. Dynamic story creation. I used to be very proud to say that it was required reading in several divisions of Disney, but I don't think anyone at Disney has read it in the last 5 years. So it's still a really good book, though. It's all theoretical. It's how to be a better storyteller, no matter which medium you're writing in. If you are a prose writer, the other 2 are specifically for prose. Better Writing Through Stronger Narrative is the base of what you need. You need to understand everything in that book to write solid prose. And then the Ultimate Guide to Show Don't Tell is how you write immersive, gripping prose. But you really need to understand everything in Better Writing before you get to the Show Don't Tell, because Show Don't Tell builds upon that. I do have a training website, drakeu.com. Unfortunately, I launched it right before I was diagnosed with cancer. I'm just now getting back, so I'm starting to make videos again. But drakeu.com is where you would go to pick up any of my classes that I'm doing. And I am adding classes to it now that I'm finally back to health. And then last, you heard me mention the writer's room. If you want to work with me on a weekly basis, me and a Hollywood script writer, his name's Travis Cody, we set up what we wished we had 20 years ago. This is a room created by 2 writers dedicated to making you a better writer. We have, first of all, you get to work with me, on a weekly basis. I'm doing critique sessions, writing sessions, development sessions, classes. Also, there's all sorts of event or resources that we create to help you kind of work on your own to become a better writer. Plus, the entire community is all people wanting to become better writers. So every single one in there is trying to make every single one else a better writer. We just launched it not too long ago, so we are still in the building phase. So the first 250 founding members are going to get 50% off for life. It's normally $100 a month. So if you would like to get 50% off for the rest of the time that you want to be a part of the writer's room, use that link, bit.ly/Drake's Room. It is case sensitive, so capital D, capital R, and you can sign up for 50% off, and you'll have that discount for the rest of the time that you want to be a member of the writer's room. So if you do want to work with me on a week to week basis, that is how you do it. And that is the end of my presentation. I only went 17 minutes over. Actually, we started a little late, so I only went 10 minutes over.
Well, thank you so much, Drake. That was absolutely amazing. We have a lot of comments in the chat saying how much this exceeded expectations and was absolutely amazing. We are going to.
I want to say, since you said that, and again, I'll try not to break my own arm. Probably my weakest class on how deep I actually go into writing. I just want to say that, because this is not representational. I mean, I was happy to do it. It's interesting. I'm going to add it to my repertoire, and now other conventions that want to hire me, this will be a part of my list of classes or whatever. There's nothing wrong with it, but I do want to say that I am famous for really going in depth. And every one of my classes, I say, I promise you will walk out of here with information you can use right now, today, to be a better writer right now, today. And this has a lot of theoretical stuff in it. So it's a little different from my other classes. So I know, like I said, I just want to kind of say that.
I can see that. I have watched a lot of your other trainings as well, and I would agree with you. However, I think this is a wonderful addition to your repertoire, because it is something that a lot of authors still need information in. The writing craft is amazing. I'm a firm believer of publish when you're done, but always continue growing, always continue developing your craft. Never aim for perfection, just aim for improvement. And I think that writing craft is a huge component of that. But in order to have something to improve, you have to keep writing, you have to keep publishing. And like you had said in this talk, you need to sell your books in order to feed yourself to write the next book. And so this element, this creating the next story, this writing the series, is a huge thing that authors still need to understand and work towards. And it's a big part of being an author. So I think this was really valuable for a lot of people. I know I learned a lot. I kept a bunch of notes myself. There were some really fun comments
Well,
about
and
note
actually,
taking.
a bunch of people have made comments about, well, I'm a beginner, whatever. Um, I don't want anyone to freak out when what I just said. Everything I do is designed for all levels of writing. So if you're an absolute beginner, when you get into my, more advanced classes, they're not really 100% of it. You're going to absolutely walk out of there with stuff that you can use right then. If you're more advanced, then some of the things I say might be old hat, but I guarantee you there'll be stuff that you haven't heard that you'll learn. If you're an advanced professional, I guarantee you, yes, some of it you're going to have heard, but some of it is going to be stuff that you're just going to be like, oh, wow, that makes me a better writer. So my classes are designed for all levels. I didn't want to scare anybody off and go, oh, well, I have to wait until I get into his other classes then.
Yeah, well, I think all of the training is a continuous adventure. When you're a writer, you can always be growing in all areas. So I'm going to remove this slide from the screen, but I will bring it back up after we do some question and answers. Just before we dive into questions for Drake, this is presented by Atticus. And for those of you who are watching that are not yet using Atticus, I'm going to do a quick plug here. A big part of this presentation was about consistency. What Atticus does is it is a writing and book formatting software, and it has features that really help in terms of getting your series or collection of books out into the world consistently. So you can come in, format your book, do it yourself, don't have to hire a high-priced book formatter. And then you can use that same theme to apply to every book that you publish after this first one or your next one. And there are tons of features to help make this process a lot easier. You can even create box sets. So once you have your series created, you can quickly put them all together and sell an EPUB box set. So if you haven't checked out Atticus, that's just a quick plug for it. Jump over to atticus.io after all of the Q&A is over. But now I want to jump back in and answer some questions from our audience.
I will say, so I've left the publishing industry and gone completely indie now. I am a client of Atticus. Like, it is fantastic. It really, really is.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great because I know from personal experience you pushed back a little bit on on
So
having a formatting tool like this.
Professionally trained typesetter. And so there are things that I will still do using like InDesign or whatever, because my collector's editions, I will go a little crazy. I'll do some things that, like I have a book here. I don't know if Atticus could even do this. So you have this book here, which is a novella, but you also have the other half of it. And so one is written this way, but the others would be upside down to it. I don't know if Atticus could create that. So there are some things that I can do as a professional typesetter, but man, when you took me in and showed me the Atticus stuff, it blew my mind on what it can do. And 99% of what published authors need is in that application. Very few people are going to want to do a book that has two different sides. But it was called the Coin of Collision duology. So I wanted to make it a coin that you could flip. So yeah, it really is. And that's not lip service or me just saying this. Like, I'm using it. It's fantastic.
Awesome. Well, we love to hear that over at Atticus. That's wonderful. And just so everyone knows, you cannot currently flip your book. However, it is on our to-do list. So
Okay.
never say never.
Well, there you go.
In the future. Okay, so but getting back into the series. So everybody who is still here joining in, get ready for some discussion. I'm going to go back through our comments, but leave any questions and we'll get there. I am going to start out by saying right at the start of your presentation, and then to finalize it, you kind of said all your classes are great for beginners to advanced. So with the concept of writing a book series and how valuable that is as a marketing tool, and with the rise of indie publishing in general, a lot, especially, AI is a big conversation. There's a lot of books being published. As I mentioned, I'm a fan of get it written, get it published, continuously improve over time. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between quantity and quality. If having more books helps you sell your previous books, that's wonderful. but there still needs to be the element of quality there. So can you maybe talk on that point just as I go and get some questions ready for you?
Yeah. So I'm old school. I do definitely lean toward quality over quantity. In the publishing industry, the only thing the industry actually cares about is something called hook rate, which leads to sell through. Sell through is the ultimate thing. They want to know how many people who buy your first book buy the second, and then how many people buy the second, buy the third. Most professionally published authors run about 40 to 45% hook rate. Less than 50% of people who read their book will read the next. Your New York Times bestsellers will get into that 80, 75, 80, maybe even upwards of 75, 80. That's about where they sit for the most part. I sit at 94% hook rate. And it's not because I'm a genius, and it's not because I'm a god or anything like that. It's literally because I spend an exorbitant amount of effort dotting every I and crossing every T, from the theoretical level, the plot level, the character development level, the whole 9 yards. Michael Straczynski, he wrote Babylon 5 and he wrote the first Iron Man movie. He has a statement that I've literally kept to heart my entire life. He said, "Look, I don't mind writing slower than people who write better than me, but I must always write better than people who write faster than me, because the reality is the faster you write, the less quality you have. It's just the way it is." So I'm not a man who writes fast. I don't meet deadlines usually. I just take whatever time I need. I mean, I worked for a TV network that I won't name for 2 days, because it was tons of money. But when I went in, they were like, "This is what we're doing." I'm like, "That's insane. I'm not putting my name on that. I don't care how much money you pay me." And I left. Um, to me, quality is everything. I want to make sure that when I get a fan, that fan knows, "Oh man, if I get into something Drake's, it's going to be good." Maybe it's not my thing, like Magic Fall. There's nothing wrong with Magic Fall. Like the fans that reach out, they were like, "Oh, it's a good book. It's a good story. It's just, you babied me a little too much. It was just not my thing." I'm fine with that. Like my only 2-star review on Goodreads, and I haven't memorized the whole thing, but the first line says, "I don't like fantasy, but," and I'm like, "Well, I'm out." I don't care what you have to say now, because who cares? I hate country music. I'm not going to review country music. So to me, quality is everything. But 20 books where we met, their entire training thought process is to just write fast. But they don't have a lot of sell through. They end up changing author names often, because once you get an author name out there with a bunch of 1 stars, you're not really going to, it's going to hinder your ability to sell future books. So then and I have spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars on the Drake brand, because it is a brand, like Coke, like McDonald's, like Nike. The Drake brand is a brand. I don't want to throw that away and start over again. I've spent way too much time, way too much effort on the Drake brand. So I've always treated it that way. So when I do something and my name is going to be on it, like even with this class, even though like it may not meet my threshold of what I would normally do as a class, I'm still going to put as much as I can into it. I'm going to make it to where I would still find value out of it, so that, I know that I'm giving value to whoever is out there. And so that's just how I live. And neither is wrong. Like the 20 books people are fine. They're writers. They're making money. They're doing their thing. They all have fans too. There is a market for everything. I'm not saying anything bad about, "Oh, those guys are terrible because they don't do quality and they only do speed." No, that's what they're doing for their career, and that's fine. I don't want to do that for my career. I want to do this other thing. I want to, I'd rather write slower and just put out very high quality stuff that is going to, at least if you're an epic fantasy fan, is going to capture you and hold you. I do honestly believe the hardest thing to do, like everyone thinks finishing your manuscript is the hardest thing to do as a writer. It's not. It's not even the top 10. Hardest thing is to sell 1 book. The second hardest thing is to sell a second book. The third hardest thing is to sell a third book. The first 10,000 hardest things to do is to sell the first 10,000 books. After that, it does get a little easier. It starts snowballing, whatever. And then like the 10,001st hardest thing to do is to finish your manuscript. So I don't want to have to go out and get more fans. I don't want to have to, dig and do this marketing side. It's too time consuming. I don't do it. I'm a storyteller. It's work. I mean, if I wanted to work, I would go get a real job. I wouldn't be an artist. So, that's just how I feel about it.
Yeah, I think those are great thoughts, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this can understand that. I think that there is absolutely a market for people selling fast fiction, and there are certain genres that really just they want the next book. They read a book a day. For the majority, I think, of authors who are trying to make a career of this, you either fall into that camp or you don't. And if you don't, that's where these valuable tips can kind of come in, where you find your comfort zone in terms of getting the next book written and continuing to provide your audience with something to read, but also making sure that you're developing yourself as an author, that your reader loves the world that you've built, like you talked about, the characters that you've developed, like you talked about. And all of these points are really built in and baked into your writing process.
So you said something brilliant there that I do want to, you kind of brushed over it and I want to highlight it. It is also genre specific. I mean, I get invited to a lot of romance conferences to teach my writing stuff at. And I've said this in front of like 600 romance writers, so I'm not embarrassed to say this. Romance fans are the most forgiving. Literally, you could be a crap writer. It doesn't matter to the fans. Whereas epic fantasy fans, you miss a comma and they will stone you to death. But why? Why? It's not that romance readers are dumb or whatever. They are looking for something different. They want the gushy feeling inside, period. That's what they're looking for. And it doesn't matter if you develop the characters, the world, the writing, whatever, you give them the gushy feeling inside. Now, there are different levels of romance. And so maybe that gushy feeling is higher or lower, depending on what type of, romance you're writing. But as long as you fulfill that, they could care less if you can write. They're not there for the writing. They're not there for the characters. And that's why, most successful romance authors are writing 20 novels a year because they're writing the same thing. They're writing, the quality doesn't matter. And they're famous and they're successful and they're, everyone loves them because, again, you have to understand what your market is looking for. And that's what you're fulfilling. The reality is that writers all we are is entertainers. We are there to provide a vehicle for readers to fantasy fulfill in. That's it. That is all we are. Nothing else. I mean, it's hard to like, I'm an artist, so I want to think that I'm doing whatever. No, I'm literally a vehicle for somebody to fantasy fulfill inside of. That's it. That's the base. And once you really understand that, you go, oh, right. No, I understand my job. My job is to give you what you're looking for so that you give me money. And that's it. And so, yeah, I'm not poo-pooing on people that are writing fast because it's great. And depending on what you're doing, it's what you should be doing. I'm in a different market. I'm in a different, I have a different fan base. You just have to understand what you're targeting.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's very interesting. And a big part of this presentation was devoted to world building. And in a lot of romance, particularly contemporary romance, or those genres that are really fast paced, pump out books, they tend to exist in the world that we live in. So you don't have to make up all of that canon that you discussed. However, what really can set those authors apart, even if you are writing super fast, is the character development, the arcs, and the transformations that each character goes through. And I apologize, I'm not even going to attempt to say your name because I don't want to butcher it. But one of the comments when you were talking about after the world building and you were talking about character growth was, I've always wondered what grow means in this context. And this came in when you were talking about transitioning from one book to the next. So having a character arc that is fulfilled in a book, but then also throughout a series. And you did talk about this. There was another comment a little bit later on saying, wow, that was really helpful, saying that this is gold. And so I think that you did answer a lot of this in your presentation. But for those who are watching that maybe don't need to devote quite as much effort into the world building, that maybe are writing a little bit faster, but want to elevate to the next level, can you talk a little bit more about this character growth?
Yeah, because this is more of a 201 level question or maybe even a 301 level question. So this is why I get excited. Look, the reality is, so I have a bunch of Drakeisms. One of my Drakeisms is nothing you write is real. Your characters aren't real. Your world isn't real. None of that's real. There's only one thing that is real in a novel, and that's the reader. That's it. They are literally the only thing that's real. So everything you write is not for the world. It's not for the characters. It's for the reader. The character's there to impact the reader. The world's there to impact the reader. The situation's there to impact the reader. The way you do sentence structure and paragraph structure is there to impact the reader. How you punctuate is there to impact the reader. Literally everything you do is to impact the reader. The reality is everything boils down to theme. If you don't have a theme, and dynamic story creation is literally an entire book dedicated to nothing but theme. Without a theme, you don't have a story, period. End of discussion, because the theme is the only thing the reader walks away with. Easy way to think about this is think about something you read 10 years ago or a movie that you loved from 10 years ago. Now, unless you're one of those freak human beings that have a photographic memory, I don't remember what I ate for breakfast a couple hours ago. So I don't understand those people. But unless you're one of those people, more than likely, you don't remember the details of that movie or that book. You remember some things, but what you really remember is how the book made you feel. That's it. That's what you remember. It made me feel X, and so I still remember it fondly. I still want to go back to that journey. That feeling comes from the theme, period. That's what it comes from. If you don't have a theme, then I verbed it, you're Michael Baying. No one goes into a Michael Bay movie expecting to be moved. No one remembers a Michael Bay movie a year from now. Now, I've given him all my money. I'm not bitching about, I'm not downing him or anything like that. He's way more successful than I am, but he's in a visual medium. I'm not. I mean, I work in it, but my bread and butter comes from novels. In a novel, the only thing that the characters or the reader's going to walk away with is the feeling. That's it. They're going to walk away with that theme. And so when we talk about growth, when we talk about character growth specifically, it's growing through the theme, which means more than likely whatever you're proving in your story. So and I know it's a movie, but let's use Finding Nemo because most people have seen that. And it's brilliantly written from a structural standpoint. If we look at the Marlin story arc, so don't worry about the Nemo story, but the Marlin story arc, which is the daddy fish. The thematic question that we're asking that is what type of parent to be. Should you be an overprotective parent and make sure your kid never has any danger? Or should you understand that you're there to protect them, but they need to grow into an adult? So that's the question that we're going to ask the audience. That means, since you can never mention your theme, the only way to allow the reader to consume that theme is through growth. So if we're going to prove that you should not be an overprotective parent, then the character must start on the side that you're trying to disprove. That's why it always bothers me when people are like, oh, I love my characters. They're my best friends. Well, if you believe that you should not be an overprotective parent and you love your character, then you're probably not going to have them be what you hate or what you dislike or whatever. That's bad. That's why I said you shouldn't fantasy fulfill within your own stories. So Marlin starts off as a very overprotective parent. Man, he's so overprotective. He's willing to let his child live in his bedroom and never go to school and never have any friends and never experience life at all. That's how much of an overprotective parent he is. Now we get it, but that's that's just brilliance of the writing. So we start on the wrong side, and the growth is the story showing them that they're on the wrong side. And we do that in many different ways that I won't go into. That's an entire series of classes of mine. But we're going to change. We're going to grow to the correct side of the theme. We're going to learn through the lessons of the story that, oh, wow, our way of living is wrong. And if we had just known this at the beginning, Nemo wouldn't have gotten kidnapped if Marlin wasn't an overprotective parent. He gets kidnapped because of Marlin and his being on the wrong side of the theme. So that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about growth. So, or character growth. World growth is a little different because obviously we might not be messing with themes. We might be, but it just depends. But that's what we're really talking about character growth is they are changing something to something you're trying to prove. They're having an insight or a moment, or they're changing social standings or whatever, but all of it is tied into the theme. If they go from poor to rich, it's because we're trying to teach something to the audience about that movement. Or if they're going from rich to poor, or if they're going from married to divorce to married, whatever, we're trying to teach the reader something. And so we're going to grow that character from being what we're trying to disprove to what we're trying to prove in the story.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really fascinating. That's one of my favorite lessons that I've learned from you actually is how to tie character development into the theme itself by having them move from one side to the other. And there's plenty of other ways that you can work through these thematic elements. You know, everybody talks about the character flaws and personality quirks. And to make a three-dimensional character, you should be working on these anyways. So this helps you tie in that to the story, which I find very, very good. Um,
So
another thing
somebody
you,
actually wrote something in comment that I just quickly want to say.
yeah,
Um, somebody wrote, Essence readers may be more forgiving, but just like buying chocolate, they'd rather have the good stuff. It's the reason why, even though I haven't written romance under that author name in, I don't know, 9 years, maybe 10 years now, there probably still isn't a month or two that goes by that I don't get a fan mail that says, man, we'd love to get something from you. Like, because I did give them the higher quality than they were used to. And they will notice. 100% they will notice. Now, I could only do one of those a year, not 20. So, you know, it still comes down to that. Anyway, sorry. Oh, it was
yeah,
the same person that said that. Is oh, that's the one you pulled up. Okay.
yeah.
Sorry.
I just swapped it out for you, but this is who originally made the comment. So thank you. That was really insightful. I agree. Very, very helpful. Um, really great thoughts to think about when you're actually writing and developing your characters, whether you're a plotter or pantser, as you talked about.
The only thing I want to add to that is that may sound really scary to people that are just starting out. And again, that was more level 201 or maybe even level 301 level stuff. The thing that I always try to really impart on people is, yes, there's a lot to learn, especially when you get into theory and structure. I mean, dynamic story creation is literally just about the theory of it. I've got my hero's journey book coming out in the next couple of years because I've got one more coming out before then, but it goes into structure. Yes, there is a lot to learn. But here's the thing. When you learn this stuff, your job becomes so much easier. Literally, you can make up stories about anything on the fly and it will impact the reader because you understand the theory behind what stories are. You understand that you're fantasy, you know, that you're a vehicle to fantasy feel off of. You understand that the reader is what you're impacting. You understand the 10,000 years of written history that we can draw upon to understand what humans are looking for and what's going to impact humans, because that's really what we do. And so what I said might sound like, oh, wow, there's no way. Absolutely. I mean, you've been to one of my classes, so I'm a little easier. I am dyslexic. I have a remedial 9th grade English education. The only times I've been to college are when they pay me to show up and teach, you know, at one of their MFA programs. I've never actually been to college. So if I can do this, literally anyone can do this. I am the lowest bar that you could possibly have as somebody who would do this professionally. It's just time and effort. So if anything I said about the theme, you're like, ooh, that's terrifying. It is. I get it, but it's not. It's just time and effort. Just spend time and effort and, get dynamic story creation will help you a lot, but there's other things out there as well. I promise you, if you commit to learning this stuff, your job as a writer will not only be easier, you'll be more successful.
And it's also important to know that you don't have to learn everything and be perfect at everything all at once. Focus on one thing that you'd really like to improve upon, whether that's world building or character arcs or figuring out your plot points. Focus on one element and really work on that first. And your stories are going to naturally develop over time. And once you feel very like you're confident in that one area, then you can try another thing and build on that.
That's exactly what we work on in the writer's room. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what we're doing is we're constantly working with you on whatever the thing is that you're working on developing. Actually, usually, so one is great. I think most people can handle 3. That's what I try to say. Like, let's work on the 3 things that you're the weakest at, and then we'll get those, and then there's other things you're weak at, but now these 3 things will be stronger than those. So then these other 3 things will become. So I'm usually for my students, I'm constantly working on whatever their 3 lowest aspects of writing is. I think most people can swallow that. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, this
yeah.
is the writersroom.us. I myself, Monique Danielle, not on behalf of Atticus, but me as a writer and part of the writer's room. So I can attest to the fact that you start with where you are and you learn a lot about where you are, because one of the things that comes up frequently when you're joining in and being part of a writer's community, you only see your writing at the level that, like, everybody thinks that their writing is great until they start seeing other people poke holes in it or see people at a higher level than them. And then you can start recognizing where you can grow. And everyone can grow as an author. But you have to start at the level where you're at and build from there. So creative communities like the Writers Room really help you see where your weaknesses are and where your strengths are, because there are a lot of things that every writer probably does really well, and they don't even realize how extraordinary they are at that. So having people both encourage you to grow in certain areas, but also say, hey, wow, I really thought that was handled well. Or where you can find what other writers maybe don't do as well. And when you can start seeing that in other people's work, I can say this for sure. When I start recognizing things in other people's work, then I see where I'm doing it. So it's kind of working backwards, but
Well,
it's an amazing thing.
two things to add on that. One of my Drakeisms is, one of the weird things about this craft is you can only see below you in skill. You can't see above you. So you think you're just as good as, Brandon Sanderson or whatever. You're not even playing the same sport as Brandon Sanderson. You're just not. But you can see below you. And again, I'm a big prove it guy. I never say anything without going, and here's how I prove it to you. So if you've ever read anything that you wrote 6 months ago, 12 months ago, whatever, it probably reads like garbage. And it should. If it doesn't, you should be scared, because it means you haven't grown as a writer. Why does it read like garbage? It wasn't garbage 6 months ago or 12 months ago. Did like gremlins come into your computer and put bad writing in it? No. When you wrote that, you're like, this is great, because that's what you could see. 6 months from now, 12 months from now you're looking down and you're like, that's horrible, because you can only see below you. And then the other thing I want to add, whether you join the Writers Room or not, I don't care. You cannot grow as a writer if you are not in a critiquing writers group, period. End of discussion. Reading books, coming to these classes, doing all this stuff will absolutely help you and make you learn faster. But you must both be critiqued and critique others. You cannot grow if you're not critiquing others. You can't. And I know I meet a lot of people like, I don't want to critique others. I don't want to make them a better writer. You're not making them a better. I mean, you are, but you're doing it because it makes you a better writer. Period. End of discussion. I don't care what you do. Google writers, writers groups in your area. Join one. Join the Writers Room. Great. Join something. You have to be in a critique group, or you will never grow as a writer. Period. Like, literally end of discussion. Otherwise, you're just living in a bubble and you think you're good. That's it.
That's also the kind of thing where you don't really understand how true that is until you have experimented with it. So absolutely. So we've gone for a while. I really want to answer or ask you some of these specific questions.
Yeah. Let's burn through those.
Yeah. So Crystal asks, do you have any tips for brainstorming story plot ideas? I do well with world and character building, but I struggle with coming up with the initial, what do I write about?
This is where learning structure is going to help you out. So now, again, I'm also in the script world. I really like Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. Now, I haven't read Save the Cat Writes a Novel, although I own it. I've read chapter 1 like 5 times, and I just keep getting distracted. But basically, if you read Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, it is for script writers. So you'll have to extrapolate a little bit, but it really comes down to this. And I still use this process every single time. Now, I understand the hero's journey to the nth degree. I teach it. I'm very immersed in it. 85% of everything that's written today is written on the hero's journey. 100% of everything I've ever written is written on the hero's journey. The hero's journey is great. If you do it right, no one will ever notice that you're writing the same thing that everybody else is writing. It just is the way it is. So I start off, and Blake Snyder talks about this in his book, where I take 4 colors of Post-it notes, and I take 10 of each color. And I put 10 across the top, which designate Act 1. I put 10 below that, which designates the first half of Act 2. I put 10 of a different color below that, and that's second half of Act 2. And then I put 10 for Act 3. And then I'm a tentpole writer when it comes to story creation. And what that means is I need really 5 things. If I can get 5 things in a story, that story's done. 100% done. I just now have to fill in the blanks. So I need to know what my everyman moment is. I need to know where the camera turns on like I was talking about, that scene that has the gravitas to grab the reader and make you love this character. If I can figure out where the camera turns on and you're like, oh, I'm following this girl. Like, I love her, love everything about her. I'm going to do, that's the everyman moment. So I find that. I need to know what my inciting incident is. What is the thing that came along and broke the character's world? I need to know what my point of no return is. Now, the inciting incident can be the point of no return. Absolutely. But sometimes it's not. So if we look at the Matrix, the inciting incident was follow the white rabbit. Let's go talk to Trinity. By the way, Morpheus is real. I know you think that don't, things are weird and you've been looking, but I'm here to tell you 100% his world is shattered. He could still go back to work. And he does. Literally, he could just be a programmer for the rest of his life and nothing happens. The point of no return is, would you like the red pill or the blue pill? Like, that's the point of no return. Once he does that, there's no going back. So I need that. I need to know what my mid-act 2 climax is, and I'm not going to get into it. That's a whole topic just on itself. I need to know what my climax is. Once I have those 5 things, now I just got to fill in the blanks. Like, those are my tent poles that I start with every story. I get those, and every one of those, again, I'm writing with the understanding of, I'm not just looking for, oh, this is a cool event. I'm looking for what's going to impact the reader the most. What everyman moment is going to impact the reader the most and make them love this character the most. What inciting incident is going to impact the reader the most and make them go, holy cow, this is crazy. What, point of no return is going to make them go, oh, there's no going back. What is that mid-act 2 climax? And again, there's a whole bunch of things for that. And then what is the climax of the story that makes them go, yes, that was awesome. And again, it's all about the reader. So I get those 5 things and my story's done every time. There's a lot to learn about those 5 things. Like, I just went over it really quickly. Those are very complex things, but it's that easy.
Mm-hmm. And again, everything grows over time. So if you can focus on that, make sure you have those points, then you can keep working to develop each of those and learning more about each of those and how to make each of those elements more powerful as you grow as a writer. It's a continuous process. Okay, so next, we do have a lot of romance writers, both in the Atticus community and the world in general. Romance is the biggest genre that exists. So in all of our comments about, writing fast and the quality doesn't have to be the same, please don't misunderstand that to mean that the market isn't exponentially huge. And if you are a romance writer, there's just an unlimited opportunity for you. So we have some specific questions about that.
It's easier to give the reader a gushy feeling than to move them with a human thematic element. And the gushy feeling is the theme of the whole thing. The romance is the theme, but it's just easier. And so once you learn the process, like in my hero's journey class, I actually use the romance journey as well. I do them both simultaneously. So I go through the 3-act play using the hero's journey and the romance journey, both simultaneously, as we look at all the elements of the 3-act play for both of those. It's just easier to accomplish because the readers know what they want. When you get into, the Shawshank Redemption or whatever, it's just a more complex topic. You have to teach the reader more. They don't really know what they're looking for. So you have to kind of show them what they're looking for because you're dealing with, some topic that, like romance, you always know, I'm looking for the gushy feeling. Like, that's what I'm here for. Same thing with murder mysteries. Murder mysteries are also easy. I'm looking for justice to be served. Show me a crime and then solve it. Make it happen. Mm-hmm. Just easier. Nothing, not bad, just easier.
And a focus on a different thing. So you really focus on the emotions in a romance rather than the magic, for example.
Right.
So Christy had kind of a 2-part question here. So first she asked, if someone wants to write fantasy romance along the lines of the Twilight series, do you think the quality of the writing isn't as important? And would quality writing go unappreciated? And then the follow-up to that was, do you think the effort put into well-written romance novels would go unappreciated? So how I'm taking this is like, I'm imagining when you're selling a house, there are certain things that you can invest in upgrading that will give you a great return on investment, and some things that you're just throwing money at the wall. In terms of writing romance, is developing your quality of writing a big enough investment for your effort and time that the readers will make that big of a difference for you.
So Cindy's already answered the second part of this question. Romance writers do love quality. They're readers. They want the, that extra benefit is just going to make them, it's just like she said, it's the difference between Hershey's chocolate and, Belgian chocolate. There's a very big difference, and, you're going to be there. So I do think, again, it's why I think that people still reach out to my other author name. And the reason why I keep saying that is even my wife doesn't know that author name. She just spent the money. That's all that matters. I do believe quality, but that's my belief. That's my, anything I'm going to do, I'm going to put a lot of quality into it. And that's all I care about. Other people are different. Other people will have different reasons for writing, all of that. And so you're going to have to make that decision. Go back to the first question.
Okay. That one there?
Yeah. Okay. So, because I knew I had to point, but I couldn't remember it. This is not me. This is Stephen King. Stephen King said this. So if you get mad at Stephen King. I'm just repeating his words. Stephen King said, Stephanie Meyers, who wrote Twilight, and J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter, basically wrote the exact same story. The difference between them is one of them will be read 20 years from now. And when was the last time you heard anybody talk about Twilight? Like from a fan perspective.
So I'm going to say that there's always going to be room for everyone, because
100%.
Me as a reader, I am 100% more likely to read and reread the Twilight series than I am to read the Harry Potter series.
Interesting.
I am the only person who still thinks that way, maybe. But
you may have also just moved down on my level of. No, just kidding.
But I will say the reason I read the Twilight books is entirely different from the reason why I would read the Harry Potter books.
Right.
If I read the Harry Potter books, it's because I want to be immersed in the story. I want to be paying attention. I want to be following along with these characters and doing everything that they're doing. I want to be involved as a reader. The reason I would reread the Twilight series is because I just want something easy to read. I don't want to focus on it. I just want to use my time in a mindless activity, and I get some enjoyment out of it. So the difference is why I'm reading it.
Right.
And that is a lot of.
Myers has made more money than I have made. So I'm not dogging her. There are some amazing romance writers out there that write incredibly well. Their craft is great. Their stories are great. So I'm not poo-pooing on the romance industry at all. I'm just saying that there is, everybody knows this, there is a lot of romance out there that literally is just, you can tell it was just churned through. And yet still people read it. Because again, just a different reason why the readers are there. And that's, you have to look at this from a business standpoint. So everything I'm saying is from a business standpoint. It has nothing to do with art or anything like that. So don't take that wrong. I'm definitely not, it might sound like it, but I'm absolutely not poo-pooing on anything. Same thing with Twilight. I don't think Stephen King was, degrading Twilight. It's the truth. You don't see new versions of Twilight on the bookshelves with a new cover. But every year there's a new Harry Potter with a new cover, and every year they sell out. There's a difference. That's all I'm saying. And that's all Stephen King was saying is there's a difference. And so do I think that quality is important? I think quality is important, but that's the type of reader I am. That's the type of writer I want to be. That question is really subjective. You have to decide. Do you want to find an audience that just wants to churn through as fast as possible and just feed them their desire of what they're looking for? Then that's what you want to do. And you're fine. I've got a ton of friends that they call themselves pulp fiction writers, where they're just writing, military sci-fi is rife with this as well. Men mostly read military sci-fi, and the writing quality for the most part, and again, there's some brilliant military sci-fi writers out there, but a lot of it is very horribly written. But it doesn't matter. They have a huge fan base because they care about the action and they care about blowing stuff up. They're kind of Michael Bays of the publishing world. And so they find their audience. The audience loves them. They fantasy fulfill exactly what the audience wants to fantasy fulfill, and they're successful. And they're happy with it. I wouldn't be, because I'm so focused on quality. I would feel bad inside. That's not what I want to accomplish. It doesn't mean that they're bad people for doing it. They're 100% great people because they are fulfilling what the readers want. But I don't want those readers. I don't relate to those readers. I'm not that type of reader. And so I'm looking for other readers, and I want a fantasy fulfill for them. And that's it. That's all it is. There's no wrong answer. It's just what you want to do and the fans that want to read what you do. That's it. That's all it is. There's no good. There's no bad. You're fulfilling for a certain group of audience members. Now, some are bigger. There's more audience members that just read romance for the gushy feeling inside, and they literally don't care about anything. There's way more readers like that than are looking for quality romance. Now, that doesn't mean that if they find one of them that they wouldn't totally be blown away by it, but they're still looking to read 50, 60, 70, 150 novels a year. Like, that's not a problem. I mean, it was a problem. So I remember when the romance industry tried to roll out subscription-based reading, and they lost their shirt because they forgot the fact that, oh, right, I was selling 300 novels a year to this person, and now I'm not. And how do I pay, how do I get that money to those authors? So it was not a very good move for that industry, because that industry already has an addictive readership that's willing to pay for 300 novels a year. Great. Keep that. Like, I would love to have a reader that, that would read 300 of my novels a year. Then I would be more successful than Stephanie Meyer's. But, that's just, again, it's a business. It has nothing to do with the art side of it. And so don't take me wrong when I'm saying this. It's what you want to accomplish with your career. You have a comfort level of what you want to achieve. Find the audience that wants to give you money for achieving what you're achieving, and then be happy. Be happy. I mean, my friends that are, some not very good military sci-fi writers, I would never read them. Like, I think they're writing, and I've told them this. I mean, they're friends of mine. I don't pull punches. So they know I think their writing is very subpar, like 4th grade level, but they have great fan bases. They're full-time writers. They love what they do. They love their fans. They don't care that I think they're bad writers. It doesn't affect them at all. We still go out to lunch or whatever. Like, again, you be happy with what you're doing, and then do that.
Yeah. And know your audience. So in terms of being happy with what you're doing, do something that you can get to know your audience with and know what their expectations are. And if what you love doesn't match what your readers love, then you'll have to find a new place to connect with the people that you're trying to connect with. I don't think that investing in improvement in any way can ever hurt you, but knowing your audience and knowing what they expect and knowing what you love and what you value is going to be the key indicators. S&D also had. Go ahead.
Since I'm a storyteller, I have to teach in stories, and this will just take a second. So there was one woman that came to class back when Twilight was relevant. And so I picked on Twilight a lot in class. I used it as a bad example for certain things. And she was a huge Twilight fan, huge. And so every time that she was in class, I'd pick on it more because we had become friendly. And so it was, just kind of the thing between us. And after my show don't tell class on how to write very immersive and very showy, she came up to me and she said, see, this is exactly what you couldn't write Twilight in. This is what I'm talking about. If you wrote Twilight like that, it would ruin the story. And I went, good writing will never ruin a story. So that night I went home and I rewrote the first opening scene of Twilight. It's Bella in the car with her mom. I don't remember where they're going. The window's halfway down, the wind's blowing, and I rewrote it and I sent it to her. And 10 minutes later, she wrote me an email back that said, oh my God, you have to rewrite Twilight. And I'm like, no, there's a lot more wrong than just the prose, but good writing will never hurt a story, ever. No, will not.
Yeah. And we've got a follow-up to that coming, but S&D made a good point as well, especially coming from the topic of writing a book series, is that many readers will be forgiving of new authors. And this is not just new authors, but new authors to them. So it takes readers a minute to get used to an author's writing. And there are many, many first books, and she mentioned it's true of Terry Pratchett as well, which are nowhere near as good as their later books, but they had a great story. So there's always
Butcher's a great example of that. His first book is meh, but I mean, the Dresden series is fantastic, and he gets better. But really, by the third book, he has really grown into it. Christopher Panettone is another great example. He was 16 when he wrote Aragon. It reads like a 16-year-old wrote it. But by that fourth book, and what he's writing now, like, he becomes a very good author as he grows and matures through life.
Yeah. And the way to think about this isn't necessarily to just throw out any old first book because it doesn't matter, you'll get better, but rather don't hold yourself to the epic highest standards possible for your first book because you are guaranteed to grow no matter where you are. So put something out that you're proud of and then be even more proud of the second book and the next book, and your readers are going to grow along with you.
Yeah. Basically, the rule of thumb should be, because again, this is business. This has nothing to do with anything else. You want a book that's going to be out there that's going to at least hit that 3 out of 5 star mark, because you throw out that first book where you hit nothing but 1 stars, and that author name is dead now. Like, you're not going to get a second book. So, like, it has to be good enough to at least be like, okay, it was the first book. You know, there's a lot of mistakes in it, but I really like the story, and I'm going to give it 3 out of 5 stars because this author has potential, and like, that's what you're looking for. If that's where you're at. And that's fine. But you need to be honest with yourself, and you need to know that it isn't just you love it and your spouse loves it and your mom loves it. Like, you need to have tested it out, and you need to get that feedback before you, because I mean, the problem is that once it goes on Amazon, those reviews never come down, like, ever. You can't request them down. You can't hack them down. They're there for the rest of your life. So just be aware of that.
And that's where things like beta readers, ARC teams, editors, a lot of indie publishers don't invest in editors, and that can have consequences for them. But critique groups like the Writers Room and other critique groups, all of these come in handy so that you can see maybe what you're missing. So a follow-up question on the terms of quality is, could you unpack what you mean by that? Is it fulfilling all the elements of the hero's journey? Is it prose quality, precision of metaphor? Where can you go with that?
So I love that you grabbed that, because I saw that come up on the channel. I was like, oh my God, I really want to answer that question right now. So I really love that you pulled this one. This is subjective. Like, what you think is quality and what's important to you as a storyteller is going to be different from other people. So like, I have a really good friend who read my first thing, and they were like, oh my God, I really love how you write action. It was just as good as X. I won't say who X is, but it broke my heart, because X is not, in my opinion, a good action writer. And so I was just like, oh, sad. But to him, because he's a fan, he's just a fan, he's never written anything and doesn't want to write anything. To him, because again, you can't see above you, they were the same. And so he's like, I love this guy, and you are just as good. I'm like, yeah, I'm not just as good. Like I've left him way behind. But again, that's subjective. It's very, very subjective at this point. And so, like, I mean, I just said I have a 2-star review on Goodreads. It's my only 2-star review, but whatever's in that, he did not like. So what we do is subjective. You're never going to please everybody. It's why I don't read my individual reviews. I just look at my rating. Now pretty much I'm running 4.8, 4.9 out of 5 stars. And as long as I stay up in there, then I know I'm doing my job. That's what I look for. I don't read individuals, because just like everyone else, I'll read 100 reviews. They're like, this guy's the best. And then I'll read one. It's like, this guy sucks. I'm like, you know what? Those other 100 people, they're stupid. That person knows what they're talking about. I suck. And then I'll go into a depression for 2 weeks. Like, I don't do that. So, it's subjective. So quality is going to be what ultimately you're the artist. Ultimately, your name goes on the product. Ultimately, you have to be satisfied with what you're doing. To make a living at it, ultimately, then you have to find other people that agree with you about that are willing to pay you money so that you become a professional author. But the reality is quality is incredibly subjective. It's whatever you feel is quality. I mean, like, I'm a snob when it comes to prose. I've been pushing it for 20 years. I've ruined myself as a reader. There's almost nothing out there that I can read now. Literally. Like, everything, I'm just like, oh my God, why did you write it this way? Oh my God, what a, like, I mean, like, I hate to say this, Brandon Sanderson used to be one of my favorite authors. His latest stuff I've been struggling with. And I don't think it's because he's gotten worse of a writer. It's just that pushed myself so far that now, because before he was above me. And so everything he did was like, oh yeah, no, I'm just as good as him. And it's, he's fantastic. And then, as I'm inching my way up, I'm looking down going, why would you write it that way? Even though 6 months ago, I might've been like, that's great. So, and again, Sanderson's a great writer. He's still my second favorite writer in the whole world. But it's subjective. Like it really, you have to understand that the quality, you have to be satisfied with what you're doing. And a part of that satisfaction is you have to be satisfied with how people are going to talk about your writing. You think Stephanie Myers cares that Stephen King said that about her writing? I mean, maybe. I don't know. I don't know Stephanie Myers. But her bank account doesn't care. So it just depends on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. It's subjective. That's all I can say.
And once again, who your readers are, because different genres take away different importance from quality. So for some genres, if you don't fulfill the elements of the hero's journey, they're never going to read you again. But for other genres, it's going to be, well, how funny was this book? How well written was the prose? A follow-up comment here was, how do the rules apply for books for middle grade? Again, their quality does matter, but the type of quality you're talking about is going to change. So if you are working on your quality as a prose writer for adults, that's not going to transfer over to be the same quality for 7 to 9-year-olds, because you have to find out what is quality to them. Do they want the funny one-liners? Do they need to temper your language and your word usage? Do they want the moral impact at the end of the story? You have to find out what your readers want and then work to improve your quality in those areas.
Yeah. Snurse, my award-winning screenplay, which is, you can kind of get it now if you want to check it out. It's really written for 7 and 9-year-olds. It's a Pixar type, Lion King, Finding Nemo level story. Obviously, I wrote that differently than I write my dark epic fantasy. So you just have to understand your target market. Now, the thing about writing that level of script, you have 2 target markets because you have parents. So you're writing 2 levels of story. One is much more subtext that the adults are going to appreciate and get and laugh at. And then the other is much more shallow that the younger audiences are going to get. And so that becomes actually harder than you think. It is harder to write a, Pixar level movie script than you may imagine, because of the fact that you are writing an entire story with subtext that is there to make the adults appreciate it. Because I mean, when my kids were young, some movies I went to and I just zoned out, and other movies like Finding Nemo or Monsters Inc. or whatever, I'm just there. I'm like, this is awesome. I don't care that my 5-year-old likes it too. I'm just there for the ride. So a well-written, and again, it's learning that market.
Mm-hmm. So that did help. S&D also brought up a great point. If 50 people say your dialogue is wooden, then you probably need to improve the quality of your dialogue. Whatever isn't your strongest area of storytelling, that's the one you try to improve next. And this is a really great point, especially in terms of getting feedback. So if you are an indie publisher and you don't have the funds to get to hire an editor, and you haven't gone through the critique groups, and you don't have your beta readers because you don't know how to get those, then your feedback is going to come from those reviews. That is still just as valuable, because when you put your book out there and people review it, you need to learn from what they're saying. It can be soul crushing to get low reviews. It can be soul crushing to get hard critiques, but these are the things that are going to improve you over time. So it's the most important information you can have. And if you can get into some critique groups, if you can get some beta readers before you publish, you'll find out where your weak spots are, and then you can focus your attention on those.
So one of my Drakeisms is Drake's rule of 10. Get 10 people who do not care about you to give you feedback. If less than 8 of them say the positive, then you've got to rewrite, because you have to extrapolate that. So my fan base is around 350,000. If I get 10 people to read it as beta readers, that means each one of them is 35,000 readers. So I have to, like, if one of them is like, this is terrible, then that means 35,000 people are going to say it's terrible, which is fine. Like if you go 8 out of 10, that means a 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, great. I can live with that. But if 7 of them are like, this is amazing, and 3 of them are like, no, this is a problem, then it's a problem. Like period, end of discussion, doesn't matter. Now, if at 7 to 3, that means it's a little problem. If you're at 3 to 7, 3 people are this is great, and 7 people it's a big problem. So it just depends on where. And now we're talking also, you have to pay attention to what they are. Like, are they fantasy people? Because I'm writing fantasy. You know, I have people that aren't fantasy people that will give me feedback, and I still take it 100%. But I definitely give it less weight than if an epic fantasy fan is, gives me feedback on something. So you do have to weigh the feedback as well as the feedback itself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And again, always keep your genre, your reader in mind, all that kind of stuff, like you just said. Okay, so we are coming up. It's been over 2 hours now. So if anybody has any final questions for Drake, let us know. I didn't put up all of the comments. There was a lot of thank yous, great information, awesome feedback for Drake, which is lovely. There was a recommendation for Jessica Brody's Save the Cat, which is a plot development book. The other one Drake mentioned is Blake Snyder. The tool that I use for plotting is Plotter, which has a variety of different plot tools in there if people are looking for that.
Mm-hmm.
Mentioned
Scrivener has some stuff in it.
Mm-hmm, yeah, Scrivener.
There's a bunch of apps out there that help you.
Yeah. So we mentioned Drake's writing craft books, which you can, I've got to focus them to the camera the right way. If you're looking for more learning, education, ultimate guide to, it's really hard to do things backwards with a camera. Ultimate guide to show, don't tell is clearly teaching you how to show, not tell. Dynamic story creation. This really helps with plotting. I use this a lot for developing my theme because that is an area that I struggle with and need constant reminders. This is one you may not have thought you needed help with, but you probably do, which is narrative, your point of view, who the character is that you're writing. These are all really great. You can get them at drakeu.com. And I'm going to put up this slide again. If you are looking for a critique group, this one is absolutely phenomenal. You get all sorts of extra bonuses with Drake and the members.
And if you want digitally, I mean, there are available obviously on Kindle. And if you're concerned about Bezos and how much money he's losing on Lord of the Rings, you can buy the book and give him an extra $1 of my money if you go through there. But DrakeU, drakeu.com will get you an autograph on it. So, and support me a little bit more than you support Jeff Bezos. So, but I do feel sorry for him. So maybe you should pitch an extra $1 his way.
Okay, so we are going to wrap up quick, but we've got one more question here. Have you ever wrote a companion book explaining a children book for adults, or would it be just not a good story? So that's an interesting one.
That is. So I try to limit myself teaching what I really know. So like I've never done a class on script writing, because while I have won awards at it, I've sold numerous scripts, I have never actually had one go over the finish line and become greenlit. Doesn't mean I haven't made a lot of money in that industry. I mean, Blake Snyder in the 90s was the #1 highest paid script writer in Hollywood, millions and millions and millions of dollars. I mean, Stephen King gave him $1 million just for one script. He only had 2 scripts actually made. Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, and one of those body swap parent-child Disney movies that wasn't one of the big ones, so it wasn't all that good. Like, that's it. Those are the 2 that he's had made of the tens of millions of dollars that he made in the 90s. So there's a lot of money can be made in Hollywood without actually anyone ever seeing anything that you wrote. It's kind of funny. So until I get to that point, I don't feel like I should be the one who is teaching that subject until I can be like, oh yeah, remember that movie that, did all this money? That's me. So, just, I don't know. I've written, actually, Snurse may be the only middle grade thing I've ever written. Yeah. Nurse is the only middle grade thing I've ever written. So I'm just, until I feel like I'm an expert in something, I'm definitely not going to put myself out there as somebody you should listen to.
Mhm.
It's a great idea. I'm just not comfortable being the person executing that.
Yeah, it's also important to remember that as an author, you can write whatever you want to write. That doesn't mean there's going to be a market for it. So, for something, a question like this, you would want to research the market first
Yeah.
and see if there's anyone interested in it, whether that's using a tool like Publisher Rocket to see if there are other books out there, or if it's going on to a Facebook community and just asking a question, would you want to read something like this? Assess the market and see if there is anybody who's interested in reading it, unless you're writing it for yourself, because that's another thing you can do. You can write a book for yourself, for your joy of writing it. There's no one out there who's going to say no. You just maybe aren't going to become a bestseller because of it. Um, on a similar tone, Karen asks if you recommend audiobooks. Again, I don't know if you feel like you're the expert in this with enough
Oh, I mean,
information, but
yes, 25% of your sales are going to come from audiobooks. So of the 350,000 copies of like Farmers and Mercenaries, I think 82,000 of those were audiobooks. So yeah, I mean, you like the Drake U stuff. Yes, I would rather you buy it from Drake U. I buy those from a printer in bulk. I usually buy a couple thousand copies at a time. They sit in my warehouse. I get them very, very cheap. I make a lot more money off of it than if you were to buy it through POD on Amazon, where they make, I make, I don't know, a third of the money off of it. But you got to be on Amazon. I mean, you just have to. You got to be on Kindle. You've got to. I need to make audiobooks of those. I just haven't had the time. I need it to be in my voice because those books are not textbooks. They're not like chapter 1 and here's your lesson. And they're not, it's me and you just talking about that topic. It feels exactly like we're sitting in a coffee shop and we're just talking. And I give you a ton of information, but it's a very personal one-on-one. Matter of fact, it's so one-on-one, you keep interrupting me, which bothers me. And I tell you about it, but we get through it, even though you're rude about it. So like it is very personal and it's also kind of funny, but I need to do those as my own. And I just haven't had time to take, 3 weeks off to produce them as audiobooks because I just got so much on my plate. But yes, audiobooks and they're nonfiction too. So I don't know how well they're going to do as audiobooks, but neither here nor there. Audiobooks is a big part of the fiction market. The one that I'm doing for this next series of mine, I'm actually doing as an all cast audiobook. Super expensive, super time consuming, and a lot of work. I've directed animation, so I've worked with voice actors in the past. I've got my own recording studio. Not that any of these people, I mean, they're all from all over the world. I've got actors in Australia and Europe and, obviously here in Hollywood and all of that. But that's how much I feel of the importance of an audiobook because, and also I've wanted to do an all cast audiobook, but no publisher would ever spend the extra money for it. And now that I've left the industry, I'm like, you know what? I can do my own thing. So it means a lot to me. I want an all cast audiobook and I'm doing it, and I'm doing the narration. So I'll be the narrator. They will be all of the characters, and it's a lot of work, but it's audiobooks are vitally important.
I like what you said there as well about now that you're not in the traditional industry, you're an indie, you can do what you want. And that is one of the most exciting things about being an indie author is that you really can do what you want. And again, that doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to sell or make a ton of money off of it. That's true for the traditional industry as well, though. But you have more control over doing what you want to do, how you want to do it. So,
So the
Steve,
publishing industry, like one of the things that was so frustrating to me about the publishing industry, you sit with acquisitions editors and agents, and they're like, you know what I'm looking for? I'm looking for something unique and never been done before. And I'm only going to buy stuff that's been done 1,000,000 times, but I'm looking for something unique. I won't buy it, but I'm looking for it. It's like, you're an idiot. I hate everything about you because you give them what they're actually looking for. And they're like, man, that's really unique. I'm not going to touch that. Like, you literally said that's what you wanted. So they won't take risks. I mean, but it's a business. They're not, agents and acquisition editors are not in it for the art. They're not in it for the characters in the story. They're not in it for the fans. They're in it to make money. And so they can't take these risks. Like, I guess so many friends that are like, why are they remaking movies? Because they made money and they're a guaranteed bet. They're a much easier bet than picking up Snurse and making it. So they'll remake Lion King, even though Snurse may make them more money or whatever, because it's a new product. But it's tough. It's tough to get these people to invest in this. And then, but here's the thing, and the reason why I went down that path. Yes, you're an indie press. You can do whatever you want. I can spend the 30 grand and do this all cast audiobook. 100% I can. I can also lose 30 grand on doing an all cast audiobook. Like, you are taking the risk. Like, yes, you can make the decision. And yes, you can absolutely understand why the industry didn't do it. Like, that literally could be my lesson of, oh, wow, that's why no publisher would let me do this, because I didn't make my money back. But the original audiobooks that when I was in the industry, I've lost a bunch of years. I already said I had cancer. I had another health issue that took me out for like 4 years. I worked for Sony, which literally took me out because I was just doing Sony. So it's been about 10 years since I've had a fiction novel come out. And so, now that I'm not going to go back to the publishing industry, I'm taking those risks. But I also know I'm taking those risks. And they are my money. They're not someone else's money. This is my money that I'm putting into it, for my future and my family and everything else. And you do have to put a business hat on. You cannot, just like I said, you shouldn't fantasy fulfilling your own stories. You should love your stories, but you shouldn't get lost in fantasy fulfilling and forget that you're actually there to fantasy fulfill for the reader. The same thing is, you shouldn't get lost in the art, and you shouldn't ever go, oh, I'm amazing, and so I love my stuff, so absolutely everybody else is going to love it too. Nope. You have to put on the business hat, and you have to be a business person when you're going to be making those decisions, because the artist in you will make you destitute. Like, they will. The artist in you will ruin you. So you have to push the artist away, and or have other people. I mean, I have a lot of people that I lean on where I'm like, this is what I'm thinking. I think it's a great idea. And they're like, that is dumb. If you do that, you can do it, of course, but here's what I think might happen. I'm like, right. And then I got to take a step back and actually decide if that's a right decision for me or not. So
yeah, I think one of the biggest struggles for creatives in any kind of world is balancing between the passion projects, because when you get into writing or painting or whatever it is that you do, that's a passion. So you have to find the balance between your passion projects and the business. If you want to turn it into a career, you have to treat it like a business. And now more than ever, there are so many tools at your disposal that can help you bring it into the business space without costing you a fortune or taking you 10 years to master. I mean, that's the entire goal of Atticus, is you can do it yourself, formatting to a professional level without all of those extra costs. It's the goal of the writer's room, where you can join a community of authors and develop your writing craft in an affordable way that is manageable, but is still bringing you kind of to the next level in your business. But you do have to keep up the passion, make sure it is always feeding you, because if you lose that, then there's no point in doing what you're doing anymore. But always balance it with the business perspective. So we're going to have to wrap this up. This has been a really amazing discussion. Lots of great comments in the
I want to add one thing, because I know this is going to be evergreen. So we haven't started marketing the writer's room yet. We've still been kind of working out bugs and figuring things out and how we're going to do it and everything like that. There's activities every single day. We are going to limit the 50% off to the first 250 members that join. However, if you're out there years after this and this is still alive or whatever, and you go to that bit.ly link and it's dead, reach out to me, remind me that I said this to you, and I will honor that for you, because I'm a man that doesn't like breaking my word. And so, if you're out there and, because I don't know how long it's going to be out there for, but if the link is dead, reach out to me. Maybe I can't give you 50% off for life, but I will 100% make sure that I give you a deal to get into the writer's room. So I'll throw that out there.
On that note, we have had lots of questions about whether there's going to be a replay of this. We had some hands cramping trying to keep up with the notes. This live recording is happening March 1st. If anybody is watching the replay, it will be available through the weekend on our Atticus YouTube channel. As of Monday, we will be taking it down off the YouTube channel because it is going to be a paid training resource. And this is going to be both in a special Atticus Authors course as well as in Drake U for Drake's members as well. So if you want forever access to this after the replay is no longer available, you are welcome to email Monique at atticus.io for access to the course there, or you can email Drake at...
There's a million ways, but it's author@maxadrake.com, starvingwriterstudio.com is my official website. You can go there and reach me. You can hit me up through drakeu.com. You can hit me up through the writer's room. You can hit me up on every social media out there. So Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all under Maxwell Alexander Drake. I do love my author name because there is only one Maxwell Alexander Drake. If you Google that, you'll get hundreds and hundreds of pages of me. So Maxwell Alexander Drake, like, you can find me. I'm very Googleable.
Yeah. So do make sure to watch the replay. Soak in everything you can over the weekend. But if you want to say thank you for his valuable time and actually buy the resource when it is available for sale, definitely send an email. And I really hope that you guys have all enjoyed this. Judging by the comments, you absolutely have. Okay, so just to clarify, Christy asked, so paying Atticus users do have a lifetime access to the training. This is going in a course that you can buy from Atticus. So you may already be in that course, Christy. I'm not 100% sure, but send me an email and we can work that out for you. So there's that. So again, lots of thank yous, lots of wonderful presentations. I know everybody got a lot out of this, but thank you to everyone watching for sharing your valuable time with us today. You have been an amazing audience, and I really hope that you have found something that you can take forward and run from this. Drake, do you have any final words that you'd like to share?
Thank you guys very much for your time and attention. I hope that something in my deranged ramblings stuck and you learned something, because that's really why I do this.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Drake, and everyone watching. We really appreciate your time and had a great adventure with you today. And I'm sure we'll all see you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Bye.